Hey kids, another blockbuster Marvel movie has made it to the theater screens. That means we gotta talk about all the things that you missed. Maybe, I don't know you, maybe you didn't, but maybe you did. Here's a video. Out of context spoilers. So, let's just start with the moment where I went, holy butts, this movie is amazing. No, it wasn't the complete decimation of the Illuminati, something that was, admittedly, weirdly therapeutic to watch. It was the sheer raininess of the whole film, specifically the moment where I realized exactly what Doctor Strange was going to do with his deceased alternate universe self. That's right, Deadite Doctor Strange, baby. The character people assumed would be the true villain of the film was, in fact, our lead in a decaying skin suit. Amazing. For those not in the horror movie know, director Sam Raimi also directed the Evil Dead trilogy, a series predicated on a demonic Book of the Dead, in that case the flesh-bound Necronomicon, which when used brings about demonic possession of those who dared tamper with it. Sound familiar? Yeah, if this was and actually come to think of it also, it's based around H.P. Lovecraft nonsense. H.P. Lovecraft created Cthulhu, who's the demon in the comics, who is in turn the creator of the Darkhold, Cthon, who also looks like Cthulhu. We'll get into that in a second. Anyway, yeah, if this was a comic book, it'd be called Doctor Strange versus the Evil Dead, which, by the way, where's my tie-in, Marvel? Come on, do your job! I don't actually have time to go to a comic book store. They might have done it. I have no idea. If you didn't stay for the mid-credits scene, well, shame. Shame, shame, shame. But also, you missed a pretty huge cameo. Furiosa herself, Charlize Theron, showed up as Clea, the Sorcerer Supreme of the Dark Dimension, and, in the comics, eventually the wife of Doctor Strange. Looks like the two of them are gonna have to team up to figure out all this multiversal madness started by, Sylvie, the female version of Loki in the series Loki. Admittedly, Clea is not an alternate version of Strange himself, but still, there is a bit of a comparison to be made, so pretty interesting correlation right in there. Other big $2 words. This is going horribly. But what exactly is Clea coming to Strange for? Well, considering she immediately cut open a portal to the Dark Dimension after mentioning an incursion, I'm gonna go with that. The incursion, as we saw, is something that happens when two universes smash into each other with Earth as the central point of impact. This is inferred to be the cause of the catastrophic conditions of the last universe visited by Strange and Christine. Now, based on all the multiverse-based tomfoolery currently occurring in every other Marvel Phase 4 production, it seems like we're heading into a big Avengers-style event film based on some truly catastrophic universe tampering. So, expect a return to the incursion concept sooner rather than later. But hey, where's my money at for where this whole franchise is going? Gotta be Secret Wars. That's also where everybody else's money is at. It's not a new concept, but still, I mean, that's the reason we're all saying it's gonna be Secret Wars, because it seems like it's gonna be Secret Wars. In the comics, there are two major versions of this event. The 1984 version, aka the biggest toy commercial in comics history, featured the villainous Beyonder, kidnapping a bunch of heroes and villains, placing them on a planet called Battle World, and having them fight it out. Eventually, this turns into an everyone against Doctor Doom story, as is often the case when you bring in Dr. Freakin' Doom. Secret Wars was super popular and, amongst other things, gave Spidey his initial black symbiote suit. Secret Wars 2 and 3 followed shortly after, mostly just expounding on the Beyonder and his origin. But the Secret Wars of 2015, yeah, that's the one that we want. You know, basically the whole idea is that the multiverse collapses, and Doctor Doom becomes a god in his own, like, kind of sort of pocket dimension, and then there's these multiversal life rafts with all these heroes and villains that come by, and then there's all these other heroes and villains that don't remember who they are, and blah, 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 blah. Battle world, people fight, the multiverse is recreated, and what happened afterward was kind of disappointing, but point is, it's a whole other battle world, and it's pretty rad. Some fans have had questions about where exactly Wanda's children came from, and that's a mystery that the film explains. Since Thanos is defeated pre-snap, their ages aren't an issue because she's of course had more time to have and raise children. Additionally, the whole reason she's able to create the same children that exist in the alternate universes is that she dreamed them. We learn in Multiverse of Madness that our dreams are glimpses into alternate realities, from which she pulled the look and personalities of her kids. Pretty simple. Where's Vision, or, you know, whoever the father is in those universes?
Where were you hiding all these kids up till now?
What?
By the by, I'm not sure how intentional this was, but the acronym for Multiverse of Madness spells out MOM. Considering this is a film partially about motherhood and the connection between a mom and her kids, pretty cool, coincidence or not. Doctor Strange, in the MOM. Ugh. In the first Doctor Strange, Mordo mentions the Living Tribunal. If you look closely during Doctor Strange and America Chavez's initial trip through the various universes, we do get a brief glimpse at that comic book character. Whether or not this is just an Easter egg, of course, remains to be seen, but in the comics, he's basically the judge of all realities and is in charge of keeping the multiverse nice and tidy. Comic book spoilers. In New Avengers number 30, shortly before the Time Runs Out arc and Secret Wars, the Living Tribunal was killed, and his body was left on the moon. Kind of like a more savage version of what Goku does to Monster Carrot in Dragon Ball. Another quick blink and you'll miss it universe that would have been really cool to visit is the Savage Land, which is basically just a prehistoric world. In the comics, this is a physical location located in Antarctica, but it would seem based on this brief glimpse that it's in a universe all its own, perhaps an entire Earth where dinosaurs never went extinct. So I guess that's one big negative for Doctor Strange in the MOM. No Doctor Strange fighting dinos. Shame, shame. If you're a fan of Sam Raimi's Evil Dead trilogy, you no doubt recognized this 1973 Oldsmobile Delta 88 Royale floating around in the messed up final reality Strange and Christine visit. This car appears in every Sam Raimi film and is notably Ash's car in the Evil Dead trilogy. It's also the car Uncle Ben drives in Spider-Man, and Bruce Campbell has stated that it even shows up in a disassembled version in his western The Quick and the Dead. The same fans who noticed that Easter egg definitely got what Raimi was going for with Bruce Campbell's phenomenal cameo as Pizza Papa. After he gets belligerent over America not paying for his balls, Strange steps in and magics Pizza Papa into hitting himself for 3 straight weeks. Any other rando Strange did that too. It might seem out of character, kind of a dick move on Doctor Strange's part, but I'd like to think that old Doc Strange just really loves the Evil Dead movies, seeing as this is one of Bruce Campbell's most famous bits, specifically from Evil Dead 2.
It helps maintain the illusion.
We even get a classic Raimi ending. Evil Dead famously ends with Ash being attacked and presumably possessed by a demonic force. Evil Dead 2 ends with him trapped in medieval times, and the alternate ending for Army of Darkness has him trapped in a desolate post-apocalypse. That's not even digging into the relatively predictable ending in Drag Me to Hell, which I won't spoil, but the title. So when Strange is walking along and gets the old forehead pain followed by a horrifying third eye reveal, it very much feels in tune with Raimi's style. But that's not all. Even the mid-credits scene, in which he's all hunky-dory moments later, jives with the Raimi touch, as in Evil Dead 2, where it turns out Ash makes it out of his predicament just fine. Well, minus a hand and scarred for life and trapped in a medieval world for a period of time, and he loses the love of his life forever. But you know, mostly fine. The Raimi touches keep on coming though. For example, when America Chavez and Doctor Strange are just kind of falling through the universes, you can see a taxi cab sporting a Grindhouse Releasing logo. This one's a bit more of a deep cut. A little background. My passions lie mostly in film preservation and physical media, and Grindhouse Releasing is an amazing company that restores and releases cult films theatrically and in pretty rad Blu-ray editions. The company is owned by Multiverse of Madness editor Bob Murawski, who also edited Army of Darkness, Spider-Man 1 and 2, and Drag Me to Hell, amongst others. Grindhouse Releasing also handles theatrical distribution for the original Evil Dead. Point is, Raimi has a strong connection to the company, and it's just really cool to see them get the Easter egg treatment. Oh, and as long as I'm on my soapbox, this new Death Game Blu-ray, so good. Not for everybody, but I really enjoyed it. It's what that Keanu Reeves movie with Eli Roth, Knock Knock, is based on, and it's a really good little gem from the 70s, so check that out. Oh, and this might be a bit of a stretch, but when Wanda is chasing Strange and company through the tunnels under the Illuminati base, that does seem like a direct nod to Zombie Wanda in What If. While none of the What If characters appear in the film, between this and Captain Carter, there does appear to be some references that Marvel couldn't help but pop in. Or it's just me stereotyping crazy witches with a preference for the color red. I don't know. This shot in Evil Dead is also referenced by Wanda when she enters a mirror as if it's water, mostly because, it is water. One of the more rad yet simplistic practical effects in 2 Sam Raimi movies, and in this case, part of a truly horrifying sequence that might be one of the absolute top scenes in all of Marvel history for me. I love that scene. Of course, in addition to all the obvious cameos like John Krasinski's long in-demand casting as a bowl of spaghetti, there's Professor X showing up played by Patrick Stewart, and that toaster he was riding in was a somewhat clunky version of the hover chair he uses in the 90s X-Men cartoon, which is itself getting a Disney Plus continuation in 2023. If you didn't immediately make the connection, this entrance is also accompanied by Danny Elfman's interpretation of that show's Earworm theme song. Presumably, this is all just to get people really pumped for that X-Men series, which does include a lot of the original voice cast coming back, so pretty rad. Now, Patrick Stewart is one of 2 Star Trek captains up on that obnoxious Illuminati stage, by the way. Black Bolt is portrayed by Anson Mount, the same actor who played the character in that Inhuman show we all forgot the same day it premiered. He's also Captain Pike in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, itself a spin-off from his appearance in Star Trek Discovery. Considering he was Captain Kirk's predecessor, he's also canonically the oldest captain in the scene, so that's pretty dope. Now, one of my theories as to how Wanda will come back is that she'll be saved from death by a resident of Mount Wundagore. This is because in the comics, Mount Wundagore, in addition to just being really fun to say, is a pretty major component of various characters' backstories, Wanda included. It's also the place where Chthon wrote the Darkhold, which is of course analogous to him carving it out atop the mountain. The most notable resident of Mount Wundagore is the High Evolutionary, who is essentially Marvel's version of Dr. Moreau. And his, you see, look, that's 1-to-1. You know, is it Marlon Brando or is it a giant machine man? I can't tell. And his cow-woman hybrid Bova is the person who delivers babies, Wanda and Pietro, within the High Evolutionary's home. It could be that the MCU version of the High Evolutionary rescues Wanda and takes her to a nearby town or base, and maybe, just maybe, that's where we'll get our version of Magneto. Or not, probably not. I'm just paid to make up nonsense sometimes. Either which way, the High Evolutionary is rumored to be a character in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, meaning my guess is probably meaningless, and Mount Wundagore isn't nearly as important as I think it is. This is all pointless. I'm terrible at my job. One easier reference to spot, Earth 616 is the name given to the MCU's primary universe by Earth 838's Christine. Now, this has caused a bit of a kerfuffle amongst some sticklers in the fan base, since the official designation for the MCU is Earth 19999. But here's the thing. 1, that's a mouthful and sounds dumb out loud. 2, it's a reference for fans. And 3, Christine is an alternate universe character, meaning that she could just be using an alternate name meant to apply to how Earth 838 designates the MCU's world. And 4, it doesn't matter. That said, good on Mysterio for guessing the name of the MCU's multiversal designation.
This is Earth, Dimension 616. I'm from Earth 833.
Now back to Mount Wundagore for a sec. Those minions who Wanda gets as built-in servants at her new summer home are reminiscent of how the evil god Chthon is presented in the comics. Basically just really beefy Cthulhus. Now, one reference seemingly tailor-made for Miles Teller if John Krasinski didn't work out is when Reed Richards is referred to as being a part of the Baxter Foundation. In the comics, the Fantastic Four work out of the Baxter Building, and the only use of the term Baxter Foundation was in that ill-fated 2015 reboot of Fantastic Four. Oh, and remember when Patrick Stewart is walking through that white void and you were like, "Aw, snap, he going battle with Wanda." And then that led to, "Ah, snap, he got his neck snapped. Oh my god." Well, if you were paying close attention, you might have noticed WandaVision playing on the TV. We also get at least one musical cue from that show. And one of my favorite references, aside from the Grindhouse releasing one, which by the way, The Swimmer, excellent release, mind-blowing film, definitely worth the pickup. Is Wanda's children watching Oswald the Lucky Rabbit playing on TV. Oswald was basically the precursor to Mickey Mouse, created when Walt Disney's animation studio was still growing, and was eventually taken over completely by Universal after Disney and his staff, including animation god of iWorks, went off to do their own thing and created the eerily similar but far more successful Mickey Mouse. Ew, history, gross. Say, remember in the House of Midlife Crisis Goatee Strange when Christine uses that rad cannon thing to blast away some demons? That's the brazier of Bom Goliath. Brazier? I feel like there's a different way to say that. Whatever. The brazier of Bom Goliath. keep that bust in shape, girls. Which was used in the comics to enhance a spell so that then new Thor, Eric Masterson, could sneak through Mephisto's realm undetected and give him a good butt pounding. Huh. It also shows up briefly for a gag during Strange's fight with Caecilius in the 2016 film. That's a dumb way to say it. In the 2016 film Doctor Strange. I don't know why I wrote it like that. Just the 2016 film. You know, the film from 2016. Come on.
You don't know how to use that, do you?
Some folks, nay a lot of folks, had some questions at the end of No Way Home, specifically as to how Strange's final spell works. While having a bit of post-giant eyeball creature lunch with America Chavez and Wong, Strange tries to explain how he already saved the multiverse with Spider-Man to America, who is quick to ask the most important question: does he shoot webbing out of his butt? Anyway, this scene is a great, quick and easy explanation of what happened. Strange says he doesn't think so regarding the butt webbing, telling us, the audience, that he knows Spider-Man, remembers the primary events of No Way Home, but does not remember Peter Parker. Tasty yum-yum narrative shorthand. And finally, this is kind of another dumb one, but the finale of Multiverse of Madness features Wanda pulling the old disappear under rubble routine, allowing us a theoretically dramatic ending while leaving the door open for future appearances. For me, it was one of the downsides of the movie. It's a little anticlimactic. But anyway, of course, we all know that Wanda will be back for a redemption arc at some point, but the scene from his own filmography Sam Raimi clearly rips off doesn't have the same open-endedness, specifically that of Doc Ock's death in Spider-Man 2, in which he pulls that whole pier thing down on himself to save the world, or at least New York, and dies drowning. And yet somehow, you know what, dude still came back. Good for him. Moon Knight Season 1 has concluded, and what can you say other than A, spoilers inbound for all 6 episodes, and B, holy butts, look at that giant crocodile kaiju fighting that bird skull your weird uncle bought you for your birthday. Here's 25 things you missed in Moon Knight. Maybe. I don't know you. You might know all of this. And by Conchu, I know you'll inform me in the comments if you do. So let's go. Okay, so this one's really just for those who didn't stay for the post-credits scene where comic fans get quite the reveal, and so does poor, ill-fated Arthur Harrow. In this scene, we find Harrow in the mental hospital, seemingly whiling away his time until Kevin Feige reaches a deal to bring back Ethan Hawke for round 2, only for a man speaking Spanish to take him in his wheelchair out of the hospital with at least one seemingly innocent orderly left deceased at the scene. This guy takes him out to a limo where Harrow is confronted by Khonshu, who explains that Mark Spector has, gasp, another alter in the form of, drumroll please, Jake Lockley. Mr. Lockley pulls out a gun and kablamo! No Season 2 for Mr. Hawk. Jake then drives off, and we see that the limo even has custom plates, suggesting something more ritzy for Mr. Spector. For those who haven't read the comics, Jake is one of Mark's original 3 alters. There he's a cab driver who serves as a sort of everyman in the streets to pick up intel. He's not a baddie, but it would seem that the show wants to introduce a little more drama by making him the bloodthirsty alter willing to do whatever Khonshu wants. And if you are a comic book reader, this came as no surprise since Khonshu is, well, a massive dick. Dude's always trying to screw over poor Mark Spector, and that's cause for a lot of great stories in his more recent comic book runs. Also, this suit is a pretty iconic one for fans of the comic, so it's nice to see that here as well. Really, this whole in-credits scene, in addition to getting rid of our big bad crocodile god, really just helps to prod the old fangasm button for anyone still unconvinced by the show. Oh, and of course Jake Lockley was referenced multiple times throughout the show, just not by name. He was responsible for unaliving these dudes in episode 3, and since Mark finds Steven in a sarcophagus, it stands to reason that this other sarcophagus contains, or is at the very least, a mental link to Jake. That limo might also be a reference to Stephen Grant's comic book version, wherein he is basically Bruce Wayne, but is more directly a reference to this limo in which Mr. Knight rides around in the Warren Ellis run, which is itself a very big influence on this series. A lot of folks have gotten pretty excited about Layla's transformation into Tawaret's avatar. As they should, she looks freaking rad. Dang, that is cool. Okay, one more time. One more. One more. Yeah, okay, that's enough. One more. Part of the excitement lies in her seemingly being both the first Egyptian superhero and the first hero created specifically for the MCU. This isn't the case, however, as nifty as that idea might be. While the characters share very little in common, Layla's avatar identity is meant to be Scarlet Scarab, a deep-cut character whose real name is Abdul Faul. Layla's surname is El Faouli, which I'm probably messing up the pronunciation, but that's just gonna happen in this video, giving us a pretty decent foreshadowing for this big moment. There's also several other references throughout the series, such as this red scarab mark when she's in the sort of hospital, and the fact that her father calls her his little scarab. As far as Tawaret's involvement, she's never actually been a part of the Marvel comics as far as I know, so hey, first anthropomorphic hippo lady in the MCU. Boom. Back to the post-credit scene for a second. If you look real close, you'll see that it's Sinkwix Hospital. Man, I love these names that I've only ever read. They're so good, great. Named after comic book artist Bill Sinkwix, who was responsible for drawing the original Moon Knight series. Another hospital Easter egg comes in the form of
Putnam Medical Facility in Chicago, Illinois,
that Mark sees as a way for his mind to cope with the concept of the Duat. This is a direct reference to the facility Mark is placed in Moon Knight number 11 from 2016, wherein Mark's origin is retold. More specifically, Putnam is where he's staying when his father dies, and we see this sign as he's on the way to his father's funeral. Of course, in the series, it's his mother's funeral, and his dad lives. So maybe we'll see some dad action. It's a weird way to put it. Going way back to episode 1, remember this exchange?
And did it suck for you? Getting rejected from the field of reeds?
Well, that don't make sense, because I'm not dead, am I?
Well, that right there is some tasty sweet foreshadowing for episode 5, in which Steven saves Mark, and Steven then becomes stuck frozen in the sands of the afterlife, while Mark, shock and awe, winds up in the field of reeds. Imagine explaining this to someone who hasn't watched the series.
That's the definition of a red flag, isn't it?
Goldfish play a pretty key role in foreshadowing as well, and seemingly in more ways than one. By the end of the show, we see 2 goldfish in the tank, a pretty clear reference to Mark and Steven coexisting. But beyond that, the show of course found other darker uses for the goldfish, and it's revealed that the goldfish, or at least the need to own one, is a product of Mark's memory of his deceased brother Randall, who drew a goldfish with one deformed fin like some kind of little weirdo. By the way, pretty messed up to remember your drowned sibling with a fish, just saying. I got so distracted by all the foreshadowing, I totally forgot to write in the script the most obvious reason for the goldfish. It's memory. Goldfish memory spans are often cited incorrectly as being around 3 seconds. Seeing as how Steven has huge lapses in his memory, this metaphor kind of speaks for itself. Oh, and speaking of goldfish, Gus's tank features a whole bunch of foreshadowing by itself. Take a drink every time I say the word foreshadowing. You'll find yourself on a boat with a hippo goddess in no time. In the tank, you've got the boat, the Pyramid of Giza, the Gates of Osiris, and this head, which I guess could be a reference to this gross scene. One reference for the comic fans that any casual viewers almost certainly didn't get was this brief shot of the name Duchamp in Mark's recent incoming call history. In the comics, Frenchie Duchamp, or Duchamp? Duchamp. I'm realizing I don't know how to say a lot of words that I've read for a long time. Anyway, Frenchie Duchamp is Mark's best friend and pilot, whom he worked with as a mercenary before his life of Khonshu-based servitude. He's been with him ever since that first comic in Werewolf by Night. Unfortunately, we never meet Duchamp in this season, but hopefully we get him in season 2. And hopefully he has them sick robot legs. It's a whole thing. Steven's somewhat rude boss at the museum gift shop, Donna, appears to be a very slight reference to Donna Kraft, who served as his publicist when he owned Spectre Corp in the comics. Another heavily fan-speculated inclusion that doesn't really amount to much other than a cool Easter egg is this gold dude, this street performer guy, who also appears in the mental hospital, which... Oh, because it's It's literally Mark's mind grappling with the afterlife and his identity, so it's an actual mental hospital. I got there. Anyway, lots of fans speculated based on his appearance that this was Crawley, who in the comics is a good friend of Jake's. In the credits, we even get confirmation of the character's name, but other than a striking physical resemblance, there's not much to connect the two at this point. Another character from the comics who is brought up but never utilized is Bushman, who is name dropped in episode 5.
Didn't have a ton of options after that, so I went work for hire for my old CO Bushman.
In the comics, Raoul Bushman is a cruel and sadistic mercenary who employs Mark and Frenchie, who in turn decide they need to, well, get out of Dodge, because that dude is freaking nuts. Bushman has a lot of influence on Mark's backstory in the comics. At one point, they're all partially responsible for Randall Specter's journey into villainy, and more importantly, Bushman is the one who unalives Marlene's father, which, for those who only know the show, long story short, Layla is the show's version of Marlene. She then saves Mark after he's left for dead by Bushman, leading to Mark becoming Moon Knight after he's dragged into the Temple of Khonshu. Apparently, he was intended to show up in Season 1, but Moon Knight head writer Jeremy Slater has stated that Bushman felt too close to Black Panther's Eric Killmonger, which, I don't know, like, I don't want to be that guy, but on a character level, there's really not that much they have in common outside of the military background and an interest in antiques. And, yeah. Moving on. Speaking of Black Panther, the ancestral plane used in that film is name dropped by Taweret, who explains that the afterlife is real, but just seen differently by various cultures. This begs the question, what do other afterlives look like? Does this, along with the multiverse, give us endless possibilities for the return of dead characters? Time will tell. Say, are you one of those so-and-sos who keeps their phone out while watching movies and TV? Well, for once you're in the right, because throughout Moon Knight there is a sort of hidden QR code in each episode that, when scanned, links to free Moon Knight comics, which are updated weekly. Basically, this means that you will get the same comic no matter which code you scan. For example, I scanned episode 1 and episode 5's QR codes, and both got me Moon Knight Acts of Evil, featuring everyone's favorite blue time traveler, Kang the Conqueror. By the way, if you weren't totally convinced from the moment he started putting freaking broken glass in his shoes and acting all villainy right out the gate, Arthur Harrow definitely should have rung some bad guy bells by the time he started using his Egyptian god-granted powers. See all that purple energy there? Where have we seen that before? Oh right, Agatha Harkness.
Same story, different century.
Who of course was utilizing magical energies from the Darkhold, as well as from all them other witches she absorbed or whatever. And where does that thing get its energy from? Well, it's the Dark Dimension, or basically, well, it's hell. One reference I'm not sure was intentional, but yeah, whatever, is the psychiatric facility on a boat, which could be pulling from Mark's brief stay in a similar, although far more prison-like facility that was on board an airplane in Moon Knight number 11 from 2015. That was the Brian Wood and Greg Smallwood run, as opposed to the 2016 run by Jeff Lemire and Greg Smallwood. Y'all, Moon Knight comics are, they're confusing. Mark's childhood bedroom scene in episode 5 is in and of itself a whole dang nest of Easter eggs. We get this spaceman toy that could be referencing an unnamed astronaut altar that very, very briefly appears in that much lauded Lemire run that informed so much of this series. One could surmise it's a childhood fantasy of Mark's brought out through his DID. Heck, he even did my light just go? God dang it. Everything is awful. Everything sucks when you've got a home office. Gosh darn it. Anyway, one could surmise it's a childhood fantasy of Mark's brought out through his DID. Heck, he even gets a rad crescent-shaped spaceship, exactly as a child might imagine a space-faring Moon Knight. There's also these scales, of course referring to... Why are all my lights going out? Ah! There's also these scales, of course referring to those used throughout the series, including on Harrow and his fellow Amit cultists' wrists, as well as the actual scales used to judge Mark and Steven in the afterlife. Then there's the Tombbuster poster, which aside from extrapolating on the Tombbuster footage we see as part of the mental hospital sequence, also includes some recognizable names. Well, there's this one name that's a composite of two recognizable names. Doug Moench and Moench? This is a disaster. And Don Perlin were the original creators of Moon Knight back in 1975, and the star of Tombbuster is referred to as Doug Perlin. Tombbuster is a Timely Atlas studio production. Marvel Comics was founded in 1939 as Timely Comics, and eventually became Atlas Comics before being rebranded as Marvel Comics in 1961. And as long as we're talking Tombbuster, this old school movie beloved by young Mark might be a reference to the 2011 Moon Knight comic book run by Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev, in which Mark funds a TV show called The Legend of Khonshu based on his adventures. Also during Mark's stay in the mental hospital, we get a shot of this Moon Knight figure, which is an actual toy sold as part of the Marvel Legends line in 2020 as a Walgreens exclusive. Watterson Food and Liquor, seen in episode 5 behind sad boy Mark Spector during his mother Shiva, appears to be referencing Trevor Watterson, the co-executive producer on all of the MCU shows on Disney+. In episode 1, we begin with Harrow filling his shoes with glass as a means of penance due to his impure, violent mind as a former servant of Khonshu, now serving Amit. Something we, of course, don't know in that moment. As this happens, Bob Dylan's Every Grain of Sand plays as our fun little soundtrack during this rather dark opening. Later in episode 2, the song plays diegetically in the background as Harrow is showing off his swanky cult headquarters. Considering the song is all about devotion to a god, in real life referring to Bob Dylan's born-again Christianity, it fits nicely in describing Harrow's and even Mark's motivations. And since I'm talking episode 2, let's end with the beginning, when Steven is being shown evidence by these phony cops about Mark's nefarious past. The file number is 1975, the year of Moon Knight's first appearance.
Spider-Man No Way Home delivers loads of heroes, tons of villains, and of course, like any good Marvel movie, it's packed with Easter eggs and references spanning not just Disney's Marvel Cinematic Universe, but 3 Sony movie universes as well. Oh, did you not know that already? Well, what are you doing here then? This video is obviously full of spoilers. Well, now that that's out of the way, here are the 25 Easter eggs and references I thought were cool as heck in Spider-Man No Way Home. The film hits us with a big reveal fairly early on, and one I was happy to see. About a week prior to the film's release, Kevin Feige said Charlie Cox would remain the MCU's Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. But in true MCU fashion, he was vague about when, or even if, that would actually be. Well, the timing was obviously intentional, as we're treated to Charlie Cox's appearance as Murdock in Peter and Aunt May's apartment while he helps the gang out of some legal trouble. This is also hot on the heels of Vincent D'Onofrio's reappearance the same week on Disney Plus's Hawkeye series as Kingpin. Fans of Netflix's Daredevil got some good presents this holiday. Oh, and another rad thing here is that it's Jon Favreau's second time playing in a scene with Daredevil. Here, he's Happy Hogan, but he also played Foggy Nelson in the 2003 Ben Affleck Daredevil stinker. Speaking of Hawkeye, and I know this is a Spider-Man video, but we love the MCU for its connections, Yelena Belova mentions to Kate Bishop that while she's in New York, she'd like to visit the new and improved Statue of Liberty. The line is a bit strange since that Hawkeye episode aired literally one day prior to No Way Home's release, but after seeing No Way Home, it's pretty clear she was talking about the huge frickin' Captain America shield that's been added to it. Incidentally, since No Way Home takes place during the summer before Hawkeye, the statue has already been upgraded, partially destroyed, and then rebuilt in time for Yelena to go and see it. One other small but fun Hawkeye nod is that when Peter and MJ are swinging through Times Square, we see billboards for the totally accurate and not at all cringy Rogers the Musical, the very same Avengers-themed Broadway show that Clint Barton endures in the very first episode of Hawkeye. When Doctor Strange first meets the Ancient One in his first solo movie, he says he doesn't believe in souls or the astral dimension. So the Ancient One does what any abusive teacher would do and punches Stranger's soul right out of his body. She later, or earlier, depending on how you look at it, uses the same trick on Bruce Banner, punching his soul out of the Hulk's body. It appears that, as usual, Strange was paying attention, as he employs this technique on Peter when he won't hand over the Machina de Cadavis magic spellbox. Why wizards don't just astral punch all their adversaries is a mystery to me, but when he uses it on Peter, it doesn't quite go as planned. Not only does Peter just soul swim back to his body, but his body actively dodges Strange's attempts to reclaim the spellbox. My theory on that is that Peter's tingle or spidey sense is working reflexively. We've seen examples of a spidey sense detecting things Peter would have no way of seeing or hearing, so I guess not having a soul doesn't slow it down either. Speaking of Spidey's powers, while MJ and Peter are hiding out on the roof of their high school for some quiet time, MJ reads a tabloid article that suggests Spider-Man has the powers of hypnosis and has hypnotized MJ into joining his cult of personality. While we know Peter doesn't have that power, another spider person in the comics does. Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, can emit pheromones that make her victims fall in love with her. Fortunately for everyone else, she doesn't like using it because she considers it unethical and, as she mentions in one of her comic stories, releasing the pheromones kind of feels like going pee. Yeah, I wouldn't want to do it either. Set decorators love to hide things on sets, although for all we know it could have been director John Watts himself who planted these Easter eggs. While Peter and MJ are on their school roof, a graffiti tag that says G. Kane can be seen, likely a shout out to comics artist Jill Kane, who drew for Spider-Man at one point. Later, there's a tag on Aunt May's Feast truck that reads Ditko. The last name is Steve Ditko, comic artist and co-creator of Spider-Man, along with Stan Lee. Speaking of Stan Lee, a taxi is shown just before Doc Ock shows up with the license plate 1228, which is Stan Lee's birthday, December 28th. There's another license plate in this scene, but we'll get to that one a bit later. Now from graffiti tags to murals. When Peter Parker is speaking with his old teachers at Midtown High, he stands in front of a mural depicting some great folks from history, including Sir Isaac Newton, Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, and Mae C. Jemison, to name a few. Mae Jemison, in case you didn't know, was the first black woman in space, and additionally, the first real astronaut to appear on Star Trek, with a quick speaking part in a TNG episode from season 6. Okay, back to the MCU. Also appearing on the mural are MCU geniuses Howard Stark and Hank Pym. Wisely, their two portraits are separated by a window, as they famously did not get along. Tony Stark's incompetent grabby robot arm dummy shows up in Happy's condo. Really not sure why anyone keeps this inept robot around. It's basically a Scudder from Red Dwarf. There's an old reference for you.
I wouldn't let them open a can of beans.
But seeing him in this film makes Dummy and Happy the longest running reoccurring characters in the MCU since they both appear in Iron Man 1. They're like R2-D2 and C-3PO at this point. Anyway, maybe Happy keeps him around as a reminder of Tony. Aw, now I'm sad. Damage Control shows up again, but now they're a federal law enforcement agency that not only cleans up super people's messes, but also super people themselves, since in No Way Home they come down pretty hard on Peter and his pals. Their function has expanded since they first appeared in Spider-Man Homecoming, where they were shown hostily taking over all the cleanup contracts after the Battle of New York, including the one held by Adrian Toomes, who would later become the Vulture. While under arrest by Damage Control, Peter tries to name-drop Nick Fury, but Agent Cleary tells Parker that Fury has been off-planet for the last year, which is unusually forthcoming. You'd think that would be classified, but oh well. It tracks with what we saw in the Far From Home post-credits, where Fury is very busy doing Skrull stuff in preparation for the Secret Invasion series that's coming to Disney+. I mentioned the Vulture a moment ago, and there's a clever little callback to his daughter, Liz Toomes, who Peter tried to date in Spider-Man Homecoming, but had to ghost because of the whole "your dad's a villain and wants to kill me" thing. I guess she's holding a grudge, because when Strange is chasing Peter, her picture can be seen on the cover of People magazine with the quote, "He's a liar. Let it go, girl. Your dad's a bird, your boyfriend was a spider. It was never gonna work." In the mid-credits scene in Spider-Man Far From Home, we got a brief look at the MCU's version of J. Jonah Jameson, and for this incarnation, he's an internet persona with his own website, thedailybugle.net. Well, No Way Home dives in even further, and has him mirroring real-life internet conspiracy theorist Alex Jones. Jones is so out there that if you told me he was a comic book character and not a real person, I would have believed you. He's also been banned from almost every social media platform, so we're not going to give him any screen time here, but I will call out that Triple J tries to hawk his Daily Bugle supplements, the only other daily fix you need. And while it seems like a quirky little joke, it's a direct reference to Mr. Jones, who funds his platform by selling supplements with names like Alpha Power Vital Male Androgen Biosynthesis Promoter. That is not from a comic book, folks. Okay, moving on to the Spider-Men, who, to make things easier, get numbers in the film. Tom Holland's Spider-Man is Peter 1, Tobey Maguire's Spidey is Peter 2, and Andrew Garfield is Peter 3. While warming up for the big final fight, Peter 2 mentions his back is stiff, which calls back to a moment in Spider-Man 2 when Peter 2 hurts his back, which in turn is a reference to real life when a back injury reportedly almost cost Maguire his role in the first Spider-Man sequel.
My back! Oh, my back!
Sam Raimi, the director of Spider-Man 1, made the choice to have Peter 2's, this is getting weird, Peter 2's webbing be organic and come from his wrists. This is not unprecedented, as there are a few comics examples of Spider-Man that operate this way, but I always thought it was a weird choice. It's hard enough to believe that Spidey can stick to walls with his gloves and boots on, but mutating to have a spinneret in each wrist? I mean, spiders don't produce webs from their legs, you know. It comes out near their... Well, anyway, the other Peters are as confused as I am, but Peter 2 doesn't really want to talk much about it. Good for him. Let's move on. The Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man meme, using an image from the 60s Spider-Man cartoon, is sort of recreated in the high school science lab when Ned calls out for Peter's attention and all three Peters answer, and then point at each other. It's not bang on, but as we'll discuss later, it would seem that the writers are somewhat meme savvy at least, so we'll say it was an intentional reference. It's no secret that the Amazing Spider-Man films with Andrew Garfield weren't quite as beloved as the original Tobey trilogy. Well, at least the first two Tobey films. And in No Way Home, Garfield's Peter 3 is a little down on himself while preparing for the big fight. I think it's actually one of the most heartwarming scenes when Tobey's Peter 2 peps him up by telling him, well, you guessed it, that he's amazing. And honestly, I think Garfield was an amazing Spider-Man, it's just that his movies kinda sucked. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 tackles a story from the comics that no other film has taken on. Peter Parker's inability to save his girlfriend Gwen Stacy from dying. His grief is palpable when he tells Peter 1 about Gwen, and he's clearly reminded of Gwen when he sees Peter 1 and MJ interact in the high school lab. In the final battle, on the new and improved Statue of Liberty, MJ is thrown from the statue and a goblin bomb explodes. Peter 1 is unable to save her, so Peter 3 jumps to the rescue and the scene plays out almost as it did in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, complete with the same audio cues. But this time, instead of Peter 3 webbing Gwen and her head hitting the ground, he catches MJ and shoots a web upwards, stopping the fall and saving her. Peter 3 finally gets the redemption moment he never really had because he didn't get a third film. I take back what I said earlier. This is the most heartwarming moment in the film. After Max Dillon, aka Electro, is defeated, he sees Peter 3's face for the first time and comments that since Spider-Man was from Queens and helps a lot of poor people, that he always assumed Spider-Man would be black. He then posits there must be a black Spider-Man somewhere. Well, we all know Miles Morales exists somewhere, and it's both black and Latinx. Spider-Man Homecoming showed us Danny Glover as Aaron Davis, the uncle of Miles, although in the film there was no official mention of Miles' existence. I guess we'll have to wait a little bit longer for that one. Let's talk villains. Moments before Dr. Otto Octavius, aka Doc Ock, first appears on the bridge, we can see a license plate on the MIT Assistant Vice Chancellor's car that reads 63ASM3, which can only mean Amazing Spider-Man number 3 from 1963, the very first appearance of Dr. Octopus in the comics. It's a cool little nod, but imagine if your license plate dictated which supervillain would appear to destroy you. I'm telling you the honest truth when I say a friend of mine once, as a joke, customized his car's license plate to say Lou Bega. And now I'm trying to imagine what that battle would have looked like. Speaking of Dr. Octopus, Otto may be a scientific genius, but he's not so creative when it comes to metaphors, since he's still on about his fusion reactor from Spider-Man 2, referring to it again as the power of the sun in the palm of his hand. When he sees one of Tony Stark's miniaturized arc reactors, he says exactly the same thing, suggesting that maybe English Lit was pushed aside for his engineering studies. The Amazing Spider-Man 2's Electro was very, blue. A design choice some fans were unhappy with. In the comics, Electro is a human wearing a green suit with yellow lightning bolts and honestly a quite goofy lightning bolt mask that kinda looks like a star. It's not uncommon for films to alter costumes for the big screen so they don't look quite so, well, comical. But Smurf Electro was a big change, and it's nice to see not only Electro with a more grounded costume, but there is also a little tip of the hat to his classic comic mask. When Dr. Kirk Connors, aka the Lizard, is locked up in Strange's basement, Ned calls him a dinosaur more than once. At first I thought it was just a cute gag, but I caught a line from The Amazing Spider-Man when Police Captain George Stacy is talking on the phone to the mayor, and he says, well, I'll let you hear it.
I can assure you if there was a giant dinosaur running around the streets of Manhattan, you would be the first to know.
In the high school lab, Ned asks Peter 2 if he has a best friend. Peter 2 says he did, meaning Harry Osborn, but that Harry tried to kill him and then died in his arms. Ned is seriously distraught by this and later promises Peter 1 that he won't turn into a supervillain and try to kill him. This kind of digs into something that happens in the comics version of Ned Leeds, who sort of becomes the Hobgoblin, but was actually brainwashed and wasn't actually the Hobgoblin in the end. I really can't see this kind of thing happening to MCU Ned, but I'm ready to eat my words in a few years since there is a collection of ceremonial-looking weapons on the wall in his house, as well as some green and gold fabric shown on a sewing machine. Who knows? But I will say that Comics Ned is a totally different guy than MCU Ned. Okay, from not quite Hobgoblin to the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn gets some really good moments in this film. After battling Peter 1 on the bridge, we later see Norman ditching his mask in a dumpster in a way that honors an iconic panel from Spider-Man number 50 when Peter decides to give up being Spider-Man and ditches the Spidey suit in the same way. It's a great homage, but honestly, I'm just happy the film decided to rid the Green Goblin of his mask. I always thought it was a major misstep in the original Spider-Man films to hide Willem Dafoe's performance under a mask while he was the Goblin, and No Way Home proves me right, as Dafoe delivers some amazing performances as the unmasked Goblin. I mentioned earlier that I have to believe the writers of No Way Home know their memes, and they come through with the one line I was actually dying to hear but didn't think that I would. While locked in Doctor Strange's basement, Norman Osborn offers to help the gang cure the other villains by stating that he's something of a scientist himself. This line is taken from the first Spider-Man when Norman Osborn first meets Peter 2 and is often used to meme on someone when they are totally not a scientist.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
At the end of the film, when the universe is falling apart at the seams, just before Doctor Strange casts his final spell, there are indistinct blue glowy beings that appear to be just waiting to enter the MCU and come after Spider-Man. I took a pretty close look, and most are actually just blobs, but there is one very distinct silhouette of a person with a spear, and you gotta believe that's Kraven the Hunter, a longtime Spidey adversary who's getting his own film in 2023, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson. That's a Sony film, though, in the same universe as Venom and the upcoming Morbius, so don't expect to see Kraven in the MCU anytime soon. Another silhouette looks like it has a large tail and is probably a nod to some version of the Scorpion. Spider-Man Homecoming does introduce a version of Mac Gargan, the best known Scorpion, but aside from a tattoo on his neck, this character hasn't really gone anywhere. Sometimes a tease is really just a tease. Not sure about you, but I was kinda waiting all movie for Eddie Brock and Venom to show up. True to the wacky style of the Venom films, what we got was just kinda weird. In a post-credit scene from Venom 2, Eddie and Venom are taking a break in Mexico, and just as Venom is about to show Eddie some cosmic wonders, they're transported to the MCU. It isn't explained then how this happens, but we now know that this was Doctor Strange's botched forgetting spell. In the No Way Home mid-credit scene, we see that Eddie and Venom just stayed in Mexico for the events of the film, and honestly, can you blame them? Looking back on the film now, adding these two characters would have probably pushed the film over from balancing a lot of spinning plates to an all-out train wreck. So it's probably for the best. However, the writers did leave the Venom possibilities wide open, because Venom leaves a little blobette of himself behind in the MCU when he and Eddie return to their own Sonyverse. Well, they did it. They pulled it off. Never did I think I would see a movie event quite like this. The licensing agreements between Marvel, Disney, and Sony made it seem like we'd never even see Spider-Man in the MCU, much less 3 Spider-Mans. Spider-Mans, all at once. Not only that, seeing Maguire and Garfield in this film has actually renewed my fondness for their versions of Peter Parker. And I'm not the only one, because at the time of making this video, fans online are calling for an Amazing Spider-Man 3 for Andrew Garfield, which, hey, I'm not going to make predictions anymore because I guess almost anything can happen now. So those are the Easter eggs and references I thought were cool in Spider-Man No Way Home, and yes, there are others I didn't touch on, like comparisons to the One More Day and One Moment in Time story arcs in the comics, but those require so much backstory I didn't want to get into it here. But I urge you to look up a plot synopsis or hey, even read those stories if you're interested. Oh, and ever since WandaVision, I'm not even going to entertain any more Mephisto theories until we're shown something way more solid.
When it comes to Easter eggs, hidden details, and comic book references, Hawkeye is actually very light compared to other Marvel projects, and I'm just kidding. There are so many Easter eggs and comic book references in Hawkeye that we could easily do 50 things you missed and still have some entries to spare. And I can guarantee there will still be plenty that we missed. But we're gonna give it our best crack here and go over 25 things you missed in the Disney Plus show. Oh, and spoiler warning, obviously there will be massive Hawkeye spoilers in this video.
It's just some Christmas.
Starting off with the first episode, at the very beginning there's a flashback to the Battle of New York from the first Avengers movie, which admittedly seems like a lifetime ago now. Anyway, during the flashback, we see the Bishop's insane luxury apartment, which I can only imagine costs a small fortune knowing New York real estate, which just so happens to be in the center of the battle between Loki and his Chitauri army and the Avengers. Now, at one point during the battle, Kate sees Hawkeye do a backwards leap with his bow and arrow off of a building, and it all looks pretty cool. It has become the definitive Hawkeye shot, and they even replicated it on the first page of the first issue of the Hawkeye comic run, which was released shortly after the first Avengers movie in 2012. To demonstrate Kate's skill with a bow, she decides to use her bow and arrow by ringing the bell from the clock tower at the college she's going to. Now, while we're not sure which college she goes to, at least I didn't catch it, we do know the name of the tower is Stane Tower. Does that ring a bell? Sorry, awful pun, I know, but I couldn't help myself, okay? If the name Stane does seem familiar to you, there is a good reason for this, as it just happens to be the last name of Iron Man villain Obadiah Stane, who is also known as Ironmonger. Now, the tower may not be named after Obadiah directly, and it could have been named after one of his ancestors. I mean, the guy's from a wealthy line, but it still could be, as despite the fact that he's a villain, S.H.I.E.L.D. covered it up. So unlike Thanos, Loki, or Zemo, the world doesn't know that he's actually a bad guy. Although, who else kinda wants to have a Thanos theater, or a Zemo zoo, or Loki library, maybe even a Kang's kitchen or a Galactus gallery? I can do this all day! The whole season plays with the idea that Kate's suave stepfather Jack Duquesne has some pretty shady secrets, and although it turns out that he does have some tricks up his sleeve, he's actually not a bad guy. In the comics, Jack actually goes by the moniker The Swordsman, and although he did get to wield his sword in battle in the finale, he hasn't quite transitioned into his comic book alter ego.
Oh my God, you're Archer.
Swordsman and Hawkeye actually have a long relationship in the comics, with Swordsman being the man who taught Hawkeye everything he knows. He made his debut in 1965's Avengers number 19 as a villain, before he later transitioned into being an Avenger. While there were many highlights in the series, such as Clint and Kate's rapport, the whole bag borrowing scene, Yelena eating mac and cheese, and of course the introduction of Wilson Mother-Flippin' Fisk into the MCU, there was one other character who stole our hearts: Lucky the Pizza Dog. Lucky isn't just a feature of the series alone, and was actually part of the Hawkeye comics. He was originally named Arrow and was owned by the Tracksuit Mafia until they threw him into traffic. Clint saved the dog, taking him to the vet, but he sadly lost an eye in the process, but gained a new family. And as Dom Toretto says,
There's always room for family.
But the golden retriever who plays Lucky, Jolt, does actually have both eyes, as well as a pretty good Instagram following. Also, gonna be a little bit of a downer here. If you watched the show and thought that giving your dog pizza is a good idea, do not do it. Pizza is apparently really bad for dogs, and some typical toppings, such as onions and garlic, can be toxic for them. I'm sorry for the mini PSA here, but I felt like it needed to be said. Normal service of random movie references and bad dad jokes will resume shortly. Now in the series, Kate and Clint lay low by staying at Kate's aunt's, Moira Brandon's place while she's away. Now to comic book fans, the name Moira Brandon may seem familiar to you, and for good reason. In the comics, Brandon was a movie star who sold her estate to the West Coast Avengers, led by Hawkeye and his wife Mockingbird, which, speaking of Mockingbird, the Watch in the final episode confirmed Linda Cardellini's identity as Mockingbird. In Avengers West Coast number 100, when Hawkeye and Mockingbird visited the estate for the first time, it was attacked by a villain with Brandon having to save them. To thank her, Hawkeye made her an honorary Avenger. While the show changes her character somewhat, she is still at least a classic Hollywood star, and you can see a poster for a Moira Brandon film titled Creature of the Dark Galaxy on the wall of the apartment. Another character introduced in the series is Alaqua Cox's Maya Lopez, who is better known as Echo in Marvel lore. Echo, who is the stepdaughter of Fisk in the comics, was first introduced in 1999's Daredevil number 9 by David Mack and Joe Quesada, and she was originally an agent of the Kingpin sent to kill Matt Murdock. While we don't ever see her in her Echo costume, there are references to it through iconography, with the triangular sun symbol on her leather jacket, which her dad also has a tattoo of, and the bloody handprint her father leaves on her face, a reference to the iconic white handprint she has on her face in the comics. Ironically though, Echo was actually the character who originated the Ronin identity in the comics, with Hawkeye being the second character to go by that title. With an Echo Disney Plus series on the way, expect to see more from the character and a resolution to that particular cliffhanger sometime in the future. Speaking of Echo though, another character that was introduced in the series was her friend and fellow member of the Tracksuit Mafia, Kazi Kazimirzak. At the end of the series, Kazi goes up against Clint multiple times, first as a sniper and then again in hand-to-hand combat. This is reminiscent of the comic books, where Kazi is known as the incredibly deadly assassin, the Clown. Although he didn't seem to be quite as adept as his comic book counterpart, or to be honest, quite as creepy. Whenever I watch a Disney Plus show, I have to make sure my wallet is far, far away. Otherwise, I end up buying something I really don't need, like the blue macarons from The Mandalorian or a life-size Grogu. Who am I kidding? Everyone needs a life-size Grogu. In Hawkeye, the unnecessary item I want to buy is the Thanos was right mug, which Clint can be seen drinking from. And it's the same slogan as the one we see on the urinal during the epic Rogers musical, and could be a nod to the Flag Smashers in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But there is also another mug that holds symbolic importance. During the scene where Jack, Kate, Eleanor, and Clint have a chat over some coffee, you may notice the mugs have green hexagons and bees on them. Now, while the hexagons could be a reference to WandaVision, the combined symbols are more likely to be a reference to Breaking Bad, which is further reinforced by the fact that Tony Dalton is probably best known for playing Lalo Salamanca in the BB spin-off Better Call Saul. Now, we mentioned it earlier, but one of the best scenes in the series is the moment that Yelena and Kate sit down to talk over some mac and cheese in episode 5, because let's face it, it's not every day you find an assassin in your home offering you a tasty meal, unless, of course, it's poisoned. Yelena's love for mac and cheese actually stems back to the opening sequence from Black Widow, where the dish became one of her favorite meals growing up as an undercover agent in Ohio. Yelena also drops the line,
"My daddy says it's good for you,"
which is a reference to David Harbour's Alexei in the movie. As the show makes us fully aware of, Kate is a massive fan of Hawkeye, and he's her favorite Avenger, which, I mean, to each their own. I personally love Thor and his piercing blue eyes, but yeah, that's just me. Anyway, Kate's love of Hawkeye is reinforced by the posters in her room, with one sporting a logo which is reminiscent of Marvel's classic Hawkeye comics, while the second is part of a magazine clipping titled Hero Warship and is pinned on Kate's notice board. During the show, Clint finds himself looking for a new apartment to stay at after he temporarily breaks his partnership with Kate, so he turns to the LARPer Grills so he can get some much-needed rest. Now, this storyline is actually heavily influenced by Matt Fraction's comic book run, where the two characters also lived together as Grills was one of Clint's neighbors, with the two of them living in the same apartment building. Hawkeye is giving Natasha the eulogy she deserved, and making sure that people know how her sacrifice helped save not only the world, but the universe. As Clint visits the Avengers Memorial Plaque, which remembers the day the Avengers first assembled, he gives an emotional speech to Natasha. While you may have been a little busy wiping a tear from your eye, you may have missed the familiar score in the background, Alan Silvestri's Avengers Endgame Vormir theme, which was the musical backdrop to Natasha's demise. The tune was used earlier on in the series when Kate falls from a roof, which causes Clint to remember Natasha's fall and feel like he's witnessing the same thing once again. There are a number of storylines and plot devices that reference the comics, such as Clint wearing hearing aids, but the two most notable ones are the betrayals by parent figures. First of all, Kingpin does betray Maya's father and then turns Maya on his supposed killer, although in the comic books, as we mentioned, Kingpin frames Daredevil for the murder. Maya learning of Fisk's betrayal and the subsequent confrontation is also similar to the comic books, with Maya shooting Fisk in both eyes and leaving him blind, which is referenced in the show by the eye-to-eye line as the camera pans away. Eleanor betraying Kate is also similar to the comics, where it turned out that she was the mastermind behind the supervillain known as Madame Mask. Okay, now let's talk about the big man himself, Wilson Fisk, because I'm still giddy with excitement. While the Daredevil series did an almost perfect job of bringing Kingpin to the screen, one notable omission was his trademark accessory, the Obliterator cane. In the comics, the walking stick conceals a laser weapon that can vaporize a handgun or a person's head at close range, although Fisk admittedly doesn't use it all that often, preferring to use his own hands instead. Whether or not Fisk's cane in the MCU has the same capabilities is unclear, but maybe he got a hold of some alien tech during one of his many invasions. Moving away from Fisk for 1 second, don't worry, we'll be back to him soon enough. In LARPer Grills' apartment, we can see on the wall a poster for Dragons of Despair. This is more likely than not a nod toward the 1984 Dungeons & Dragons campaign of the same name. Also, quick side note, did the LARPing scene in Central Park give anyone else role models vibes, or is it just me? Back to Fisk now, because I'm almost as obsessed with him as I am Chris Hemsworth and those piercing blue eyes, and my goodness, can you get lost in them. Fisk's outfit in the finale is a lot more eye-catching and colorful than us Daredevil fans are accustomed to. The red and white exotic shirt is a comic book reference, with it ripped straight from the front cover of Mark Waid and James Robinson's Amazing Spider-Man Family Business comic from 2014. As we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of moments in the series either taken straight out of or heavily influenced by the comics. For example, the car chase sequence in Episode 3, and especially the shot of Kate firing an arrow at her pursuers. Another instance is when the duo infiltrate the gala in their fanciest attire, with the moment being directly inspired by Matt Fraction's 2012 Marvel comic run. However, while their main target wasn't Kingpin in that story, he was one of the gala's attendees. Now, who doesn't love a case of dramatic irony, huh? In the Netflix Daredevil series, Fisk is originally kitted out with his father's cufflinks, which serve as a reminder of his past and his abusive patriarch, and he originally wears them to keep himself in check, but by Season 3 keeps them stored away in his wardrobe. However, in Hawkeye, he seems to be wearing them all over again, and they end up being his downfall as Kate, who took one of them off during their scrap, flings one of them towards the explosive arrows at Wilson's feet using Hawkeye's coin trick technique. It seems that no matter how hard he tries, Fisk can't escape his past. At the end of the season finale, after Kate and Clint burn the Ronin costume, she tries out some name ideas for herself, such as Lady Hawk, which Clint quickly shuts down. However, the Lady Hawk name isn't just a random suggestion, and Lady Hawkeye was the moniker Kate briefly went by when she and Clint were both active in the Marvel Comics. But let's be honest, we all know that she'll be inheriting the full Hawkeye moniker very soon. Warning! There are mild No Way Home spoilers in this entry. If, like me, you hadn't seen No Way Home when you watched Episode 5 of Hawkeye, Yelena's line, "new and improved Statue of Liberty," probably didn't mean much to you. But of course, if you've seen No Way Home, you'll know that she is referring to the version retrofitted with a giant replica of Captain America's shield that finds itself front and center of a very pivotal scene in the movie. Now, while the last entry had mild No Way Home spoilers, this entry has major No Way Home spoilers, so we suggest skipping this entry if you haven't seen the movie yet. Theaters are closed here, so I still haven't gotten a chance to see the movie, but it doesn't mean that I can skip this entry. While we've been waiting some time, and not very patiently if you're like me, for the characters from the Netflix Daredevil series to enter the MCU, we finally got our wish with Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock rocking up in No Way Home. And of course, Wilson Fisk being the major antagonist in Hawkeye. But they weren't the first to make the crossover. In fact, Hawkeye newscaster Pat Kiernan has also appeared in multiple Netflix Marvel shows in the same capacity.
Thought we wouldn't notice, but we did.
One thing Hawkeye has lacked in the MCU is a cool, recognizable costume. Sorry, I'm not a fan of the cut-off sleeves. But he finally got his more comic book accurate outfit at the end of the series. However, even that isn't as comic book accurate as it could be, and in fact, Kate's sketch is actually the closest to the comic design. A more subtle Easter egg in the series comes with the lot number of the Avengers Compound Watch, which is likely foreshadowing the MCU's next big bad. That's because in the comics, Avengers 1963 number 268 is where the Avengers fight Kang, although the gang looked pretty different from how we know them in the MCU. For instance, Namor was a part of the crew, and we are somehow still waiting for him to appear in the franchise. Before Fisk makes his appearance on screen, well, apart from his hand and laugh anyway, there were a number of hints to the character finally appearing in the MCU. One of them is the repair shop in Episode 3, where Maya's dad is killed, which is called Fat Man Auto Repair, which is likely a reference to one of the more unflattering names Kingpin is given. Although, for anyone who watched our video on things you didn't know about Kingpin, you will know that he only has, sorry, it's getting me again, 2% body fat. Now, as any sibling will know, you can't help but mock your brother or sister, even if they're an Avenger, and Yelena is always teasing Natasha for doing a fighting pose while landing. However, it seems that she's doing the same pose multiple times during the fight against Hawkeye in Episode 4 as a tribute to her fallen sister. I'm not crying, you are! And finally, let's end on a heartwarming story. Alaqua Cox, who plays Echo, is indeed deaf in real life. So Jeremy Renner and Haley Steinfeld both learned American Sign Language to welcome Alaqua to the set. Now doesn't that just make your heart melt?
That's very thoughtful of you.
Hey kids, you see that new Marvel movie called The Eternals? Well, here's some things you might have missed, maybe, I don't know you. Alright, let's start with that post-credits scene you should be kind of trained to wait for, like the good MCU lab rat that you are. This is the way of the human sphere, after all. In the final post-credits scene, we're shown Dane, totally not Jon Snow Whitman, opening up an old box to reveal a creepy sword. That sword is, of course, the Ebony Blade, which, if you read the comics, is the weapon used by the Black Knight, who, of course, is Dane Whitman's alter ego in said comics. Oh man, I'm way too... Oh my gosh, why is my head cut off? Gotta do this? Do I gotta do this? Oh boy. There we go, rookie mistake. You know, professionals actually have their monitor right above the camera so that they can see what they're doing, but not me. Not me. Earlier in the film, one of the Eternals... crap, I honestly don't remember. I don't remember which one it was. There's so many of them. Anyway, one of them, Immortal Scamps, picks up a sword in the domo late in the film and refers to it as the Ebony Blade, only for another one of our litany of heroes to, I guess, correct that to Excalibur, which is a common reference point in the comics for, again, the Ebony Blade, which also dates back to Arthurian legend. Now back to that post-credits Black Knight tease, you probably noticed that voice that asks whether Dane is ready for whatever tomfoolery he's about to get into. Lucky me, I wrote this script the night I saw the movie, and of course this part's all over the news now, so surprise, it's Mahershala Ali, who of course was cast ages ago as Blade. Gotta say, the fearsome vampire hunter getting his first sort of introduction in the Eternals was not on my bingo card.
Is your blood on fire?
Of course, maybe I shouldn't have been all that surprised. After all, this is also the first film in the MCU, as far as I can recall, that directly references vampires. It's a bit of a cheeky way, but Kingo does mention that his valet tried to kill him in the past because he thought the never-aging Bollywood superstar was some kind of vampire. Which I, by the way, would love to think is a reference to my first ever Bollywood experience, Band Darwaza, which I'm probably mispronouncing actually now I'm thinking about it. Anyway, those Ramsey brothers, they sure can direct a lean, mean vampire musical, I tell you what. Oh, one other thing about Dane and his, 10 minutes of screen time. That family crest you see on that there ring that Cersei gives to Mr. Whitman is the in-comics symbol adorning the Black Knight. Not sure how many ways I can say Dane is the Black Knight, and this is a reference to that, but here we are. Our other sexy stinger comes in the form of the introduction of Harry Styles as Star Fox, aka Eros. I wish I had some footage to show you there, but... you know, theatrical release, yada, yada, yada. In the comics, Star Fox... Help me! Damn it, Slippy, get off my back! In the comics, Eros is the brother of Thanos, whom he grew up with on the planet Titan. Eros, his sidekick, I guess, slash valet, slash horrifying CGI monstrosity, Pip the Troll, also shows up in that mid-credits scene. Pip is best known as a compatriot of Adam Warlock's, who of course was hinted at in the post-credits scene in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. He also, thanks to a little magical plot junk, can teleport and has the ability to locate any individual, which of course makes sense of Star Fox's claim of being able to find the missing Eternals. He's voiced by Patton Oswalt, who of course was also previously attached to the MCU through his work on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where he played everyone's favorite clones, the Koenig brothers. And here's one you definitely missed if you pay zero attention to the credits. I know I was surprised to see his name after months of rumors that guest star... star of the guest? Dan Stevens would be the voice of the villainous deviant Crow. Welp, actually that role went to Pennywise himself, Bill Skarsgård. And Dan Stevens is nowhere to be seen in Eternals, which on the one hand, cool to hear Skarsgård, but on the other hand, man, I really wish I could tell him the final product. Now, lots of eagle-eyed viewers have pointed this out, but for those in the back, yes, Cersei actor Gemma Chan has been in the MCU before, and not all that long ago. She played the villainous Minerva in 2019's Captain Marvel. I guess since she was blue, they figured no one would, really care. Now, those in the know, when it comes to the comic side of things, shouldn't have been too surprised by Arishem being, a big old bad guy. Not only is he, obviously bad news, but in those comics, he's also literally called the Killer of Planets. By the by, if you could hear past all the epic post-processing, you might have found the voice of Arishem to be somewhat familiar. The Celestial is voiced by David Kaye, who's lent his voice to a massive number of projects over the years. He's the voice of Clank in the Ratchet & Clank video game franchise, he's General Hawk in G.I. Joe, and he even voiced Jarvis in various Marvel TV projects like Avengers Assemble, where he also voiced my personal fave, Baron Zemo, and those weird Heroes United CGI movie things. That's all just the tip of the iceberg, of course, but the point being, dude's got a pedigree. And in the Ocean dub of Dragon Ball Z, he was Raccoon! And hey, if you thought Arisham's title in the old Eternals comic wasn't enough to judge him as, well, a super obvious antagonist, then Earth X is here to serve. This miniseries postulates that the potential for superhuman beings was implanted in the Earth by Celestials who wanted these superpowered dudes and dudettes to protect, you guessed it, the Celestial that Earth was impregnated with in the long, long ago, and which, once born, in this case, after feeding on our natural resources, would of course destroy the planet. Just, lots of bad news from them Celestials, that's what I'm saying. They're not good guys. There's also a lot of references to Neil Gaiman's run on the Eternals, including Sprite's obsession with becoming an adult. In fact, in the comic run, Sprite winds up being a major antagonist, and once all is said and done, he straight up just gets his neck snapped by the Eternal Zurus. The idea of the Dreaming Celestial Tiamat is also a big part of this arc, so if you want to just get more, I guess, out of your love of this film, if you loved it, go read Neil Gaiman's Eternals run. I'm sorry I spoiled it for you. Whoops. Speaking of Sprite, we get a lot of references to historical figures who were in turn just Eternals the whole time or affected by Eternals in some way. In the credits, we get a few, including an image suggesting Sprite aided in Houdini's magic act. We also earlier get a great comparison between Sprite and Tinkerbell, the idea being that Tinkerbell can't be with Peter Pan, much like how Sprite can't be with Icarus. And this seems like a fairly obvious direct nod to the comics, wherein we find out that Sprite was the inspiration for Peter Pan. That was a drum roll, by the way. Another comic reference that's a bit more direct is the pose Icarus strikes after breaking free of his Phastos-created bonds during the final battle. The same pose and eye laser sexiness found on the cover of Eternals #6. You may also have noticed in the opening crawl a reference to the 6 singularities. If you didn't manage to put 2 and 2 together, I guess 3 and 3, whatever. They were a reference to the Infinity Stones.
There were 6 singularities.
Oh, and you know how Icarus flies into the sun at the end like some sort of superpowered dork who just got turned down for prom? Well, that was shoehorned into the movie because, hey, he's Icarus. He flew too close to the sun. They literally mention this in the movie. Because, Greek mythology, baby. Come on. Now, Druig is an interesting change of sorts for the Eternals. Usually he's the one to betray or double-cross his teammates, but of course, this being an MCU movie, something like that just has to be turned on its head.
I wouldn't go in there for 20 minutes.
But that didn't stop the filmmakers from giving him a little villainous edge. This is another one that I doubt you missed it, but I kind of just wanted to talk about it. Wasn't it fascinating how he just kind of has a cult? Seriously, the group meets in a freaking church in the middle of a commune in which Druig has complete control over all those within, and he comes mighty close to forcing them to sacrifice their lives before sending them to the river to escape. Like, I'm shocked they weren't all just like drinking Flavor Aid or something. The Eternals are also linked heavily to Babylon in the comics, so it's no wonder they settle there for a bit in the film. Thena's romantic ties to Crow, something teased in the trailer, but of course unconsummated in the film, began in the Herod Factor, wherein the Eternals battled the Deviants over the city of Babylon. This was also the city ruled over by Gilgamesh, hence his place in mythology. It's also suggested in the film that, I guess Thanos was kinda right. It's explained that the Celestial needed the energy created by the full population of Earth, and if that population was cut in half, then the Dreaming Celestial wouldn't have been born, or at least, not at this particular moment in time. Yet another point for the Thanos did nothing wrong camp.
You're not the only one cursed with knowledge.
In the trailer and the film, we also get the long-standing tradition of a glimpse at Cap's shield, in this case on board Kingo's private plane. I guess the dude's a fan of Cap and collects memorabilia. I wonder if he ever hung out with Coulson. Oh, and if you're not in the know when it comes to music, don't worry, neither am I, and I did have to look this one up in between haggling over Sammy Hagar tickets. After Kingo name drops the Korean band BTS at his studio, the next song we hear is, of course, Friends by BTS. The Domo, the ship used by the Eternals, is based somewhat on the comics, where Domo is actually, well, this guy. Domo's job is essentially to handle the affairs of other Eternals in Olympia, which is a real place and not a phony construct like in the film. He's essentially an invulnerable, undying secretary. Another minor comic book reference comes in the form of Thena's Madwiri, which is basically eternal Alzheimer's and is a pretty messed up, scary concept. The idea is that while the Eternals have immortal, borderline impervious to harm bodies, their minds are essentially just those of normal humans. As you can imagine, a few millennia can have a strong effect on one's mental well-being, as Cersei found out in Avengers number 361. This might just be me stretching for links to other properties, but did y'all notice that the way Sprite is communicating with ancient civilizations and creating myths and legends is a whole lot like how C-3PO tells stories to the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi? Just saying. There's also a character reading a Star Wars book at one point, and it is Disney, so like, I don't know, synergy?
Oh, what is that?
Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings delivered one of the MCU's best standalone features yet, thanks to kinetic fight choreography, a charming new leading man, plenty of heart and humor, and of course, a compelling and complex villain played by Hong Kong legend Tony Leung. But I know your eyes were probably distracted by the awesome martial arts, the amazing dragon fight, and of course, Trevor Slattery, but there were a ton of hidden details packed into Marvel's latest movie. Did you catch all these Easter eggs and hidden references? Let's find out right now. One of the big trailer moments leading up to the release of the Shang-Chi movie was the final shot of the film's second trailer, which saw Abomination make his grand return while fighting none other than Wong in a cage match. This was a big deal as Tim Roth's Emil Blonsky hasn't been around since the Phase 1 movie The Incredible Hulk, and that movie tends to be ignored by the MCU since it features an Ed Norton-looking Bruce Banner. But I don't think anyone predicted the way this scene ultimately played out in Shang-Chi. While the two characters fought, both got to display their impressive skill sets, with Abomination using his brute force and Wong using his portals to make Abomination knock himself out. And you would think that would be it, but there's actually more. After the fight, Wong and Abomination are talking, and it's revealed that the two are working together right before Wong opens up a portal for them to leave. It's hard to make out, but the other end of the portal doesn't look like the Sanctum Sanctorum. It actually looks like the Raft Prison, which is the super secret and super secure prison in the middle of the ocean that housed the Rebel Avengers in Civil War. Is Abomination now being housed in the raft while Wong works to rehabilitate him? If so, why? Is Wong helping train Abomination? It seems that way based on their dialogue. Or is this some sort of off-the-books operation that just wanted to see Wong make a little extra money on the side? So many questions. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings featured a surprising cameo from a Spider-Man Homecoming character.
And I heard a rumor. You know who he is?
No, unfortunately, it wasn't anyone major, but it was still a lot of fun. The vlogger on the bus in Shang-Chi's standout action sequence is the same guy who yelled at Spider-Man in Homecoming and asked him to do a flip. His name is Clev, and you have to wonder if these two appearances are going to set up more appearances down the line. Will he be someone who cameos in multiple movies? I wouldn't mind seeing him pop up again and reveal more about his mysterious past. I mean, in Shang-Chi, we learned he did a little martial arts as a kid. How fascinating. Maybe we can expect him to show up in the Eternals and talk about how he's a history buff, so would know the details about the Eternals' presence on Earth. Don't flip! Or have him in Blade or something to freak out over vampires. Either or. Sure, why not? The mid-credit scene in Shang-Chi was one of the most memorable stingers in a long time. It not only set up the sequel perfectly with a compelling mystery, but it also welcomed Shang-Chi and Katie to the Avengers. Which, quick side note, I get inviting Shang-Chi, but Katie, she just learned how to use a bow and arrow a few days earlier. What, are you looking to replace Hawkeye or something? Anyways, before the awesome ending where Shang-Chi, Katie, and Wong go karaoke singing, we get quick glimpses of Captain Marvel and Bruce Banner. That's right, I said Bruce Banner. But where's Professor Hulk? Endgame established that Bruce and Hulk worked out their differences by Bruce spending 18 months in a gamma lab to fuse their brain and the brawn together permanently.
Best of both worlds.
So why is Bruce in human form in the mid-credit scene? Does it have something to do with the snap he did? His arm is still in a sling after all, suggesting that the damage there is permanent. This is something that absolutely needs to be addressed, and with Mark Ruffalo set to return in the She-Hulk TV show, look for answers there. When Shang-Chi and Katie travel to meet Shang-Chi's sister, they're met with a bit of a surprise. After checking out a seemingly run-down building, it's revealed to be the site of an epic and secretive fight club that's popular on the dark web all around the world. As the two heroes make their way through the crowd of interesting-looking fighters, one thing stands out. In one of the smaller cages, there's a fight going on that sees an extremist soldier in the middle of a brawl. It's never mentioned, but the glowing red body is a complete giveaway. The extremist soldiers were, of course, the main villains in Iron Man 3, and although it looked like all of them were dispatched by the end of the movie, it's clear now there are more running around. And yes, I know we saw the extremist soldiers play a part in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but it's hard to tell how canon that show is anymore. Trevor Slattery is back. We all sort of expected it one way or another, but you gotta admit that Trevor's role in the new movie unfolded in a way you didn't expect. Like, could anyone have guessed that Trevor was going to be the one who had the key to guiding our heroes to the secret city thanks to his connection with a mythical faceless creature named Morris? I don't think so. And in the film, we do get a retelling of Iron Man 3 and how the villains took the Mandarin name because Wenwu was retired. But on top of that, Trevor tells the story about how a producer interviewed him in jail, but then broke him out to take him to the real Mandarin.
No, sorry. I still don't get it.
Just in case you didn't see it, this was actually a reference to the Marvel one-shot known as All Hail the King, which was included on the Thor The Dark World DVD, but of course can now be viewed on YouTube. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. I mean, it even includes a Justin Hammer cameo. When's he coming back? The MCU has changed forever thanks to the blip. What, we're still calling it that? As Ant-Man would say, is it too late to change the name? Anyways, thanks to Thanos' actions, half of Earth disappeared for 5 years before surprisingly coming back. Every post-Endgame movie will have to address this in some capacity going forward. And although it was a major plot point in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it was treated as more of a joke in Spider-Man Far From Home, as they just said, oh, all of Peter's class was snapped away and came back to get over any weird narrative hurdle. And they kind of did it with Shang-Chi too. Were any of the main characters affected by the snap? If Wenwu wasn't snapped away, how did his crime organization function for those 5 years? Those types of questions hurt my brain. All we really got in reference to the events of Endgame were posters plastered around San Francisco talking about support groups for blip anxiety. I guess that's better than nothing. This one is more of a meta reference. In a funny scene, Shang-Chi has to explain the fact that he's not Korean, which feels mostly like a shout out to Simu Liu's breakout role in the hit comedy Kim's Convenience. In that show, Liu plays the son of a Korean couple who run a convenience store in Toronto. The show is Canadian and it became a huge crossover success in the United States, much like the award-winning comedy Schitt's Creek. If you haven't watched it, go check it out. In real life, Liu was born in China and immigrated to Canada when he was 5 years old. The secret fight club that Xialing runs is called the Golden Daggers Club, which is a pretty cool name for anything if I'm being honest. Put golden in front of any sort of weapon and make that your name for a restaurant, bar, sporting arena, mini mall, anything like that, and you'll have yourself a popular place. But the Golden Daggers name actually is a fun comic reference. In the Shang-Chi comics, Golden Daggers is a name of a gang that one of Shang-Chi's sisters, known as Bao Yu, formed when she escaped her father's control. You see, in the comics, Shang-Chi doesn't have one sister, he has a bunch of them. And although that wasn't the same in the movie, the writers seem to take elements from each sister and combine them together to make the entirely new character of Xialing. Jackie Chan is one of the most famous martial artists in the world. Obviously a legend in his own country, Chan also is a huge international star and people around the world grew up watching his movies that combined jaw-dropping martial arts with a perfect blend of comedy. I mean, I'll say Rush Hour 2 is a personal favorite movie of mine, which I've seen at least 30 times. He's amazing to watch, so it's no surprise that Shang-Chi, a movie all about martial arts, would want to pay homage to one of the greats. It's been said that in the bus fight, which again I'll say is an absolute triumph of a fight scene, there's an instance where Shang-Chi uses his jacket as a weapon. A lot of people have said this looks very similar to the move Jackie Chan uses in Rumble in the Bronx, and it turns out this was intentional. Simu Liu has talked about how much they wanted to include a reference to Chan. Mission accomplished. Now the next movie should include a scene where Shang-Chi jumps through a tiny grate in a casino, just like Rush Hour 2. I mean, they already had a bamboo fight, so why not? Shang-Chi traditionally wears a lot of red in his costume, and going into the film, it was a wonder to see if his superhero duds would lean more traditionally or have a bit of a modern update. For a while there, it looked like Shang-Chi would just be wearing plain clothes throughout the movie. His first outfit had a red and white color scheme, and the way he moved around in it convinced me that Shang-Chi doesn't necessarily need a special costume to look cool and perform his awesome kung fu. Maybe he was just going to be dressed like this the entire movie. But of course, he got his special dragon scale armor
armor for the finale, and although a little basic, it still looks functional and gets the job done. Though a part of me does kind of wish she fought that entire finale in jeans and sneakers. I don't think the Great Protector would have liked that. The Marvel logo continues to expand and grow with every passing movie, and it's been fun to check out all the tiny tweaks they add to it. I mean, I don't think the Marvel logo has nearly enough Hawkeye, but that's a conversation for a different day. Anyways, the Marvel logo for Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings now includes the all-women scene from Avengers Endgame, where Captain Marvel and the MCU's fiercest female fighters all gathered together to take on Thanos' forces. A worthy addition, I might add. This isn't that important to the Shang-Chi film, but I think it's worth a mention. Okay, now who do I talk to about them adding the scene where Professor Hulk gives Ant-Man a taco? That needs to be there. So I get that the Iron Gang in Shang-Chi wanted revenge, but did they really go about it the best way? They were mad at Wenwu for all he did with the Ten Rings, so they came to his home to take his wife out of the picture permanently, and although it was successful, all it did was make Wenwu angry enough to get back into a life of crime and wipe out the members of the Iron Gang. Anyways, the Iron Gang is another comic reference, with it being one of the gangs that Fu Manchu, which was Shang-Chi's father in the comics, ran in the comics. I wonder how much things would be different if instead of a rival gang like in the movie, the gang that comes to eliminate Shang-Chi's mom once works for Wenwu. Do you think he would have been so guilty that he wouldn't have put back on the rings? In the film, the big question, thanks to the mid-credit scene, is where exactly did the rings come from? It's a plot point that's sure to be the main conflict of the inevitable sequel. The movie kept where Wenwu got the rings as a mystery at the beginning, and now we know why. Gotta set up that second movie. The explanation they did give us, though, is a fun callback to the comics. The movie says that some legends see Wenwu finding them in a cave, suggesting they've been on Earth forever. Others suggest he found them in a crater, which suggests alien origin. In the comics, the rings were actually made from materials from a downed spaceship that the Mandarin found and belonged to an ancient race of space dragons known as the McLuhans. Fingers crossed for Fin Fang Foom in the sequel. As you sat through the credits to see the end credits scenes, you might have noticed the film was dedicated to Brad Allen. If you were curious on who that was, Brad was actually the stunt coordinator for the film who tragically passed away in August of this year. It's a tragic loss. Allen was part of Jackie Chan's stunt coordinator team and really gave the film a special look with its amazing fight choreography. R.I.P. Brad. Whoever's responsible for the fight choreography for the next film has very large shoes to fill. Katie was one of the best sidekick characters in a Marvel movie that we've seen. Not only was she a perfect comic relief, but she had her own arc in terms of becoming her own hero. One funny detail about her is that when she's in a fight situation, she'll start singing Hotel California, as it will immediately disarm whoever's attacking her. And it worked too, but the song actually ties in with the movie pretty well. It's about entering a dangerous world and trying desperately to find a way out, but with no success. This parallels Shang-Chi's own journey as he tried to escape the dark and seedy world his father was grooming him for. The posters on Shang-Chi's wall in his garage apartment revealed some interesting things about our titular character, mainly that he has excellent movie taste. We see posters of Kung Fu Hustle, The Warriors, and The Godfather, and you have to wonder what Shang-Chi likes about these movies. Do you think he watches Kung Fu Hustle and thinks he can do better than them? And already, The Godfather is one of the greatest movies of all time, but do you think Shang-Chi watches that film, which at its core is about a towering father figure running a criminal empire, while his innocent son slowly gets dragged into the family business and gets a little uncomfortable? He's probably the only one who's sad that Michael Corleone becomes the new Godfather at the end of the movie for obvious reasons. Early on in the film, Katie's grandma mentions how the Day of the Dead is coming up and makes a joke about how a bottle of whiskey disappeared from her husband's grave. If you were like me, you thought the Day of the Dead would be a big factor in the plot, but nothing major came from it on a story level. But thematically, it connected to the entire movie. Katie's grandma's explanation of honoring those who had passed had an interesting parallel to Wenwu's journey, who found himself going down a dark path in order to rescue his deceased wife, who he believed was trapped in a dark realm in Ta Lo. Shang-Chi even throws it in Wenwu's face about how he isn't honoring his mom's memory by threatening to destroy everything. I think that's a fun thematic callback overall, don't you? When Shang-Chi is standing shirtless in the Golden Daggers Fight Club, I understand it might be hard to look at anything else. But if you look closely, you'll see the Madripoor flag hanging in the background. Madripoor is an island in Marvel Comics that a lot of villains like to hang out in thanks to its strict non-extradition laws. And we've already seen this place in Phase 4 of the MCU, as it was featured in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV show, where it gave us the iconic moment of Baron Zemo dancing. Can we go back there, please? It wouldn't be a Disney movie if there weren't some fun, adorable side creature that they could make toys out of. In this case, that means Morris, the Daijang that Trevor thought only he could see. But if you were curious about this creature, as well as all the other fantastical creatures in Shang-Chi, then you're in luck. These actually weren't just comic-based creatures, but they all exist in ancient Chinese mythology. Like, go and Google food dogs, and I think you'll immediately want one as a pet. Oh, is that just me? You're right, the food bill for one of those things would be enormous. Ta Lo opened up a whole new world for the MCU, and I think I mean that literally. Michelle Yeoh's Nan is one of the protectors of Ta Lo, and when she speaks to Shang-Chi about stopping Wenwu, she says things like protecting your universe. That implies that Ta Lo isn't in our universe and exists separately in a different universe. In the comics, Ta Lo is a pocket dimension and exists outside our main universe. We've already seen other instances of this in the MCU with things like Doctor Strange's Dark Dimension and even the Quantum Realm. But the question is, how does Ta Lo exist within the big multiverse that the MCU is building up?
After such a long time, the wait is finally over for Black Widow. At last, the film answered all of our lingering questions about Black Widow's origin. Of course, this being Marvel, the only way that you could truly get all of her story is if you were an eagle-eyed comic book nerd who had read a lot of Black Widow comics, and luckily for you, that's exactly what we train our agents to do. Let's go. If you're anything like me, the one part of Nat's story that we were dying to know about was that legendary Budapest story that she referenced in the Avengers while her and Clint were fighting off those alien invaders. While we didn't get the flashback scene that I specifically asked Kevin Feige for, we got the next best thing. If you look really closely, you can make out how the whole thing went down. In the Budapest apartment, there are arrow markings on the wall that imply he and Nat fought there. We know that Clint got the order to take her out but made a different call. She ended up defecting, and in order to prove herself, she and Clint blew up Dreykov's building. This led to a massive battle through the streets of Budapest that apparently resembled a Chitauri army, at least to Nat, that is. The two then hid together an event where we could see that they spent their time playing tic-tac-toe, hangman, and becoming best friends. It would be so sweet if her little sister weren't trying to track him down to avenge her. In the original Avengers, Loki gives about as much of Natasha's backstory we would get for years. He made Clint spill all the beans about all of her greatest sins, or the red in her ledger. Among the many horrible things that Natasha had done in her career for both S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Red Room, the worst seemed to have something to do with Dreykov's daughter. Now we've learned that Nat tried to take out both Dreykov and his daughter as collateral damage in order to defect. This failed and allowed Dreykov to slink into the shadows. His daughter, meanwhile, went on to become the Taskmaster. That certainly is a lot of red in her ledger. There's one really quick line in Black Widow that references one more part of Marvel's Russian stories. Yelena mistakenly calls Alexei the Crimson Dynamo instead of Red Guardian. Crimson Dynamo was actually a villain in Marvel Comics. Whereas Red Guardian was the Russian Captain America, Crimson Dynamo was like the Russian Iron Man. He was thrown into a blender with the character Whiplash for Ivan Vanko in Iron Man 2. That being said, there were several Crimson Dynamos in the comics, so we could see one pop up in Armor Wars when Rhodey finally gets his own solo series. Yelena was a surprisingly fun character, wasn't she? While the trailers certainly showed off her chops as an action star, they did not let us know that she would be cracking us up every other scene. Remember when Nat said beep beep in Age of Ultron? I always imagined the Widows to be just a little strange, like someone who hasn't been around people much and mumbles to themselves and stuff, you know? Just kind of weird, but in a good way. Her best running gag by far concerned the first clothing item that she ever purchased, her jacket that had a ton of pockets. It turns out that this jacket was hiding in front of us the entire time. Natasha was actually wearing Yelena's jacket during Infinity War. I hope she got it back. In one of the cutest sequences that we see in the entire series, we see that Natasha had a secret love of James Bond movies. How big of a fan was she? Well, she could quote Roger Moore's Moonraker line by line, so I'd say a pretty big fan. Moonraker wasn't just chosen to show Natasha's hobbies, though. That movie ends with Bond fighting a giant floating base that looked a lot like Dreykov's Red Room base. I'm just glad that she did not have Scarlet Witch's powers, or she would have made a small town live out a series of Bond films over and over, like in WandaVision. The opening sequence of Black Widow spent a lot of time showing just how deep Dreykov's influence went. How did they pull this off so quickly? They used the old Forrest Gump tactic of inserting him next to real-life historical figures. Instead of the likes of JFK and Nixon, Dreykov was placed next to leaders like President Bill Clinton and President Vladimir Putin. What's kind of funny is that all of those historical figures are now canon in the MCU. Taskmaster might be one of the most intimidating villains we've seen since the Winter Soldier first showed off his knife trick against Cap. While the comic character is a villain named Anthony Masters, the MCU version is revealed to be Antonia Dreykov. While that was a pretty big change, how Taskmaster fought remained the same. Every single move Antonia made was a reference to other MCU fighters like Black Panther, Hawkeye, Captain America, or even Natasha herself. What's sad is I've probably seen that airport fight scene from Civil War more times than Antonia, and I cannot do any of those moves. We all need friends like Rick Mason. Natasha's very own independent contractor came through for her across the movie with any safe house or secondhand helicopter that he could find. It probably won't surprise you that Mason is another spy character in the comics, known as the Agent. Seeing as he'll pretty much work for anyone, it would not be surprising if Mason starts showing up all over the place like Jimmy Woo or Coulson. It's kind of a funny coincidence that the woman who ended up playing Nat's adopted mother was none other than Rachel Weisz. Not only would she have been a top contender to play Natasha Romanoff in the late 90s, but she's married to current Bond actor Daniel Craig. According to her, at one point, both Black Widow and No Time to Die were scheduled to release the same weekend. While they were having a summit meeting about it online, Craig was literally walking around behind them as Kevin Feige was discussing how to handle the Bond movie problem. Evidently, Weisz really wanted to say, well, he's right here, you can ask him. Black Widow's mission statement was to answer every single question about Nat's life that we've ever asked, and apparently some that we didn't. The movie ended with Mason acquiring the special Quinjet team Cap uses in Infinity War to save Wanda and Vision before flying to both Avengers HQ and Wakanda. I didn't know that we were going to get the Jet's origin story too, but now I'm really interested where it ended up, or what used Quinjet dealership Mason bought it off of. If there was something very familiar to you about that car chase scene with Taskmaster, that was no accident. The sequence was clearly modeled after the legendary chase scene from one of the greatest action movies of all time, Terminator 2. Not only does it have similar action beats, but even the score references some of the best moments from the chase. If Taskmaster does come back for another adventure, hopefully she keeps the Terminator references coming. Someone has to, now that Bucky's no longer Marvel's resident Terminator, the Winter Soldier. Okay, I've got to come clean. While Black Widow definitely lived up to the hype, there was one thing I was hoping for that did not come. A cameo by Clint Barton. Well, a physical cameo, I mean. Jeremy Renner did have a brief vocal cameo talking to Nat through her earpiece during the Budapest mission.
We need confirmation Dreykov's in the building.
While I would have loved to see the entire Budapest story play out with both Nat and Clint, at least we got a little taste of it. Though, I wouldn't mind if they showed it all during the Hawkeye Disney Plus show coming out later this year, huh? Just saying, Disney, there's still time. If it seemed weird to you that Black Widow made an abrupt costume change to a white supersuit during Alexi's breakout, it's because it was a reference to one of the film's favorite Black Widow comic runs. In the series Black Widow Deadly Origin, Natasha is seen wearing the now iconic white uniform as snow camouflage, though it definitely came in handier during that story. It may have been snowy where Alexei was locked up, but they didn't do any covert ops in the snow. I'm not sure the bright white suit really did her any favors fighting in a prison, but hey, I'm not the super spy Avenger. One of the best scenes in the film was when Alexei was arm wrestling literally everyone in prison while telling tall tales about his time as the Soviet superhero, the Red Guardian. While one prisoner was not very impressed with his stories, the massive prisoner known as the Great Bear took issue with the timeline of Alexei's story about taking on the still frozen Captain America. Well, in the comics, the Great Bear was another Russian superhero who actually resembled a big bear. I would say that there's still time for him to become a hero like his counterpart, but I don't think that arm of his is going to be fighting anyone ever again. If Alexei's stories weren't enough to keep the other prisoners entertained, his vast collection of tattoos probably do. His entire body is covered in Soviet propaganda, ideology, and references to his superhero past. I mean, his fists have Karl and Marx tattooed on them. What I find interesting is how reminiscent the tats are to another Marvel character, Ivan Vanko. Is it possible that Ivan and Alexei were tatted up by the same prison artist? According to my headcanon, they were. While discussing the experiments done upon the widows, Melina dropped a line that should be very interesting to Marvel fans eager to hear anything that hints at the X-Men. She stated directly that girls were passed through the program if they had some sort of genetic potential. This is very reminiscent of the language Hydra used to describe Wanda Maximoff when they were experimenting on her. Could this line be another brick Marvel is laying for the foundation of the mutants? I certainly hope so. That mind-controlled super soldier stick is awfully close to the Weapon X program, don't you think? Melina may have gotten the least attention of the Widow family, but that doesn't mean that there is not a lot of untapped potential for the character. In the comics, she was a super spy by the name of Iron Maiden who always lived in the shadow of Black Widow's greatness. This led to them clashing on more than one occasion. Melina's Iron Maiden mask is shown in her weapons room for a brief second, hinting that more action may be coming in her future. Something tells me we will see her put that mask on in a movie or a TV show sometime soon. Black Widow begins with Natasha's fake family completing their mission in America. Apparently, they were there to infiltrate something called the North Institute. This was apparently the Hydra base where they experimented on Bucky to master the tech used to control his mind. This institute was based on real experiments the CIA conducted on mind control, Project MK Ultra. Chances are that we'll see the mind control room the Institute patented again at some point in the MCU. It's worked pretty well for Hydra and the Red Room, so who knows who will be using it next. It seems right that Black Widow's origin story would feature all of Natasha's greatest hits since 2010. She used her standard interrogation tactic that worked on Loki, where she puts on a sad face and makes the villain monologue out his plan without realizing it. She even ended her interrogation of Dreykov with the same "thank you for your cooperation" line. Not only that, but in the same scene, she used the cool Mission Impossible face mask she used in Winter Soldier. Most importantly, there's the infamous Black Widow pose that Yelena makes fun of her for before trying it out herself. I mean, it is a pretty cool pose. If you loved Black Widow and all you want is more, well, you are in luck. The movie is heavily based on the story Black Widow: Deadly Origins. This is the story of how Romanoff became the legendary Black Widow. It goes through her childhood and sends her on an adventure that sees her past and present colliding. The easiest way to get more Marvel action is to go right to the source. Alexei really hates Captain America. The only thing he hates more than his Western super soldier competition is that he never got a chance to fight him. This in and of itself is a reference to the comics. The Red Guardian is often depicted as a Captain America villain. The two have fought many times in the comics, just how Alexei always wanted. Frankly, I think the MCU version got off easy. We didn't get to see him in his prime, but it's pretty clear that Steve would have obliterated him. I don't know if Alexei would have ever gotten over it. There was something very familiar about the opening sequence of Black Widow. That's because Nat was apparently living out the plotline of one of my favorite shows of all time, The Americans. Just like with Nat's childhood, the famous FX series dealt with a sleeper agent family that posed as Americans while spying for the KGB. Both were based on real-life stories of sleeper agents that lived in the US. So if the opening sequence really spoke to you, try The Americans out, or look up stories of the real-life spy families who lived out this Avengers life. The end credits sequence for Black Widow revealed that Yelena was now working for a shadowy figure played by none other than Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Thanks to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we know that she's actually Contessa Valentina Allegra de la Fontaine, sometimes known as Madame Hydra. She has also recruited John Walker to be her US agent for purposes that we don't know yet. Could she be forming her own Dark Avengers? Well, I'm pretty sure we're gonna find out when Yelena goes after Clint and Hawkeye later this year. Despite the fact that we meet Natasha's fake parents in Black Widow, there's very little we or Nat ever learn about them. The film reveals that her mother was actually taken out and buried in an unmarked grave by Dreykov. Nat doesn't learn about her father until years later when the Red Skull informs her that she is the daughter of Ivan. While this is most likely a reference to Ivan Petrovich from Black Widow's origin story, some MCU fans think it may be referring to Iron Man 2's Ivan Vanko instead. Frankly, I just don't see the family resemblance. Obviously, there is one Black Widow mystery that has been driving Marvel fans wild more than any other. When did Black Widow dye her hair blonde? I know. Thankfully, Marvel decided to answer the question by showing Nat with a box of hair dye at the beginning of the movie. By the film's end, she has the look she sports throughout Infinity War. Now, if they'll only answer my questions about when she got her hair straightened before Winter Soldier. I mean, the people need answers, Marvel.
Well, that last episode of WandaVision definitely got us excited about what's to come, especially thanks to that long-rumored but finally confirmed introduction of Evan Peters as Quicksilver. What was up with that? Well, we're going to get into it and more as we delve into all the Easter eggs, especially the MCU ones that we spotted over the last 5 episodes. Well, at least as many as I can fit into a relatively short video. Let's start off with episode 1, which begins with an opening scene that is a very direct homage to the sitcom Bewitched, which ran from 1964 to 1972, and for a show about a literal witch and her beau, that's a great place to start for the romantic goings-on of Scarlet Witch and Vision. Early on, Wanda states that Vision has an indestructible head, which seems like a pretty dark joke about his death in Infinity War. Of course, episode 4 will bring this back around in an appropriately gruesome way. The calendar date for the work dinner, August 23rd, is seemingly a reference to the Vision-heavy issue 238 of The Avengers. In this ad, this Stark toaster is a dark reference to how Wanda and her brother Pietro remember Tony Stark and how his war profiteering affected their lives, thanks mainly to an unexploded bomb with the Stark Industries logo, seemingly mocking them for 2 days while they were trapped under rubble. This is just one of several ads now that target Wanda's past traumas, but we'll get into those in a bit. This traditional Sokovian greeting appears to be a sly reference to Scarlet Witch bewitching the Avengers in Age of Ultron, while this Maison du Mépris wine bottle is a pretty obvious reference to House of M, the comic miniseries most famous for featuring Scarlet Witch using her powers to shape the world around her. At the end of the episode, this logo for S.W.O.R.D. shows up in the monitoring room, which of course we'll later see in full as they enter the plot. In fact, we'll just kinda ignore the rest of the S.W.O.R.D. logos, seeing as they're now less Easter eggs and more just, the plot. We get them on clothes, on the drone-turned-toy helicopter, etc. Same goes for these S.W.O.R.D.-related tidbits like FBI agent Jimmy Woo calling through the radio. Sure, it's an Easter egg for those who saw Ant-Man and the Wasp at the time, but now it's just something that we get to delight in on a weekly basis. God, I just love Jimmy Woo so much. This brings us to the credits, which utilize a pixel effect that looks like how Scarlet Witch restructures reality in House of M. Gee, it's almost like that comic has some significance to the show. Now then, on to the second episode and a new decade of television. In this case, oddly enough, the show technically goes back in time a bit and opens with our couple in separate beds, a la I Love Lucy, and referencing the censorship of TV in the 1950s. The animated intro features images referencing Galactus, the Human Torch, and the aforementioned Tom King Vision series. Boba Milk is a clear reference to Wanda's nursemaid, a mutated cow, and potentially a reference to the Marvel Comics villain and nefarious witch, Agatha Harkness, with Auntie A's kitty litter, which supports a fan theory that Agnes is Agatha Harkness. In the comics, she's sometimes referred to as Auntie Agatha and even has a black cat named Ebony. Later on in episode 5, she'll even refer to herself as Auntie Agnes. The theory is bolstered by the fact that S.W.O.R.D., up to episode 5 at least, doesn't have a corresponding Westview resident for the role of Agnes. Emma Caulfield shows up in episode 2 as Dottie, and for fans of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, she sure is a sight for sore eyes. In the musical Buffy episode Once More with Feeling, her character Anya suggests bunnies, one of her irrational fears, could be responsible for the strange goings-on in Sunnydale. Since this episode, her only one to date, features bunnies in a pretty significant way, we can't help but assume this was all part of the plan. Speaking of those bunnies, there is some speculation that Senior Scratchy here is actually Nicholas Scratch, son of Agatha Harkness.
Senor Scratchy's got real star quality, don't you think?
It's a long shot and may just be an Easter egg, but all these little coincidences sure do seem to be adding up.
Oh, the devil's in the details, Bev.
That's not the only place he is.
That line could just be a throwaway use of an old aphorism, but seeing as how, along with Agatha Harkness, Mephisto is a common theory for the big bad behind the scenes, it could also be a hint as to what's to come. Seeing as Marvel's version of the devil was also a major component of Scarlet Witch rewriting reality to give herself children in the comics, children named Billy and Tommy, I should add, plus the fact that he's been teased in the trailer for Loki, chances are this is much more than just dropping a common saying. Meanwhile, this Strucker watch ad is a clear reference to Baron von Strucker, who experimented on Wanda and Pietro, thus giving them their powers. There's even a Hydra logo in case you missed the reference, something that's admittedly pretty easy for the movies only crowd since Strucker is barely seen in the movies before he's killed off in Age of Ultron. Oh, and rather than the more common advertisement position of 1010, the watch is stuck at 242, and in Avengers number 242, Vision's body is repaired. This issue also features Monica Rambeau and Scarlet Witch. When the world turns to Technicolor at the end of episode 2, red is the first color we see turn from black and white. This seems like an obvious reference to Wanda's powers, which are always portrayed as red energy. If that's the case, it could be more important than you think that the show is so intent on tying her powers to that color. Now then, episode 3, aka the one where things start to get a tad weird. In this one, we've moved forward into a 70s style sitcom, a la the Brady Bunch, but that's neither here nor there, because, oh my god, she's ready to pop. Wanda's accelerated pregnancy is straight from the comics, where she's made pregnant through magical means. Billy and Tommy, as I already mentioned, are also straight from the comics, and through a whole series of complicated events, would eventually be reborn as actual human children and become the Young Avengers, Wiccan, and Speed.
All the world's a stage, all the men and women merely play.
Vision's Shakespeare quote seems to be suggesting a dark fate, a glorious return, or maybe both. He quotes the bard, but he doesn't provide the rest of the line. They have their exits and their entrances, perhaps suggesting that a character could wind up dying or being revived by the end of the show.
You didn't see that coming.
Seeing as how Quicksilver has now shown up, this prophecy may have already come true, but let's be honest. There are definitely more surprises to be had. It's Marvel. It's like their bread and butter, come on. Meanwhile, these cans of Simser paint are a pretty silly reference to storyboard artist Jeremy Simser. Hydra Soak appears to be a jokey reference to Agent Coulson's Season 4 conspiracy theory from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It could also suggest a retcon of Wanda's powers. Since mutants are now a viable part of the MCU, Find the Goddess Within suggests that Hydra's experiments didn't give Wanda and Pietro their powers, but merely unlocked a hidden mutant gene.
Gravity O's. Launch into your day the right way.
Monica Rambeau refers to her Gravity O cereal, which features little marshmallow moonmen. Clever, seeing as how she's a member of S.W.O.R.D. and has experience in spaceflight and with aliens. Of course, episode 3 also features our first direct reference to Ultron and Pietro, which will come into play in episode 4 when we get a look at the reality outside of Wanda's little playground. Wanda doesn't take kindly to Monica bringing up Pietro's death, which ties in with all of the repressed trauma being highlighted throughout these early episodes. Speaking of which, our last reference to S.W.O.R.D. is also shown here before the big reveal, with Monica wearing a S.W.O.R.D. logo on her necklace, a pretty clear indication of where her allegiances lie. The bubble dome thingy that is revealed to contain Westview at the end of episode 3, which we'll learn more about in episode 4, gives us a pretty big clue about where the show is going. See, it's blue. As I've mentioned earlier, Scarlet Witch's powers are pretty much always shown as red, suggesting this is not all her doing. The S.W.O.R.D. perimeter encampment, first seen at the end of this episode, could be a reference to a similar situation in Thor, there done by S.H.I.E.L.D. This suggests S.W.O.R.D. is the spiritual successor to S.H.I.E.L.D. and will play a larger role going forward. Episode 4 starts off with a very direct, far more disturbing flashback to the blip, which was previously seen in Far From Home. As Monica Rambeau is reforming, we get various voices spliced in as her mind reforms, including a brief clip of Captain Marvel calling Monica Lieutenant Trouble, calling back to her much younger self in that film and presumably one of the most defining moments of her life. Next up, Fantastic Four origins confirmed. Director Hayward mentioned that some space crew were still missing after the blip. Since we're definitely getting Marvel's first family in the not-too-distant future, and their origin has always been linked to a space mission gone wrong, perhaps we're setting up a new take on the Fantastic Four. This little memorial plaque does more than just drop a name from Captain Marvel. Photon is one of Monica Rambeau's superhero aliases in the comics, giving her mother's nickname even more significance. The town of Westview is revealed to be located in New Jersey, which could mean that WandaVision will set up another upcoming hero, Miss Marvel, otherwise known by her civilian name Kamala Khan, who considers herself New Jersey's protector. Also in the comics, Vision and Scarlet Witch moved to New Jersey to start their family, which I guess I should have started with that. Anyway, as shown in this scene, Jimmy Woo has learned the card tricks that he was fascinated by in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Of course, we also get the return of Darcy, who last showed up in Thor: The Dark World. She references
CMBR. That's
relic radiation dating back to the Big Bang.
This is the same energy of creation used in the comics as the source for the Fantastic Four's powers, and could maybe even be in reference to the Eternals, which of course got pushed back to a November release date. Now back to Jimmy Woo, his whiteboard references Skrulls. I get it, man. It's always Skrulls until you know the answer. Just ask the internet. We also finally get a proper horrifying Vision corpse reveal, directly referencing his horrific fate in Infinity War. Episode 5 is chock full of references, starting with the opening credits, which feature Wanda pre-powers in her war-torn homeland, minus one detail. There's no sign of her brother Pietro. We get our usual round of sitcom references here. The house looks more like the Keaton's house in Family Ties, and the opening credits reference that show's opening painting, complete with a similar font for the credits themselves and the zoom in to introduce each character. We also get an homage to Growing Pains' opening titles with the aforementioned photos of the characters growing up. There's also a brief shot taken from Full House. Ooh, that's a fancy fireplace thingy you got there. Sure looks familiar though. Vision's green plaid shirt here is a direct homage to his look in the Vision comics, which really, just read those comics, they're pretty sick. We learn early on that Wanda isn't technically Scarlet Witch just yet, since no one's given her a cool nickname, although Kevin Feige has stated that we will finally hear that name in this show. My guess, she's going to become a straight-up villain in the end, and that mantle will signify her return to the side of evil. This would make sense, seeing as how we also get a line from Darcy just straight up laying down facts. Wanda Maximoff and Captain Marvel are the two most powerful Avengers, and Wanda could have easily defeated Thanos on her own given the opportunity. Since our big bad Thanos is no more, we need somebody to replace him who can really go toe-to-toe with all of the Avengers. I'm just saying, Scarlet Witch is the villain in Doctor Strange confirmed! Or not. Probably not, but maybe. And hey, is Monica Rambeau getting superpowers? That seed appears to have been planted since after her rude ejection from Westview, sword scientists are unable to conduct X-rays on her. In the comics, she has the ability to manipulate the electromagnetic spectrum. And what gives her these powers? Why, it's our old friend exposure to extra-dimensional energy. We also get a few references on this screen, including the common Pixar Easter egg A113, which could be referring to issue 113 of the Avengers comics, in which Wanda says she's going to make the world pay for Vision's death. Yikes. Then there's the hexagonal shape that's prevalent throughout the show, and even shows up in Hayward's office, which, foreshadowing maybe? And which gives inspiration to Darcy for the term the Hex. In the comics, Scarlet Witch's manipulations of the world around her are of course called hexes. Wanda stealing Vision's body references a deleted in-credit scene from Endgame as explained by Paul Bettany. It just didn't fit the film, which hard agree on that one, and has been repurposed for this particular program. And of course, it's also a comic book reference. We learn that the Sokovia Accords are still in effect, which may be not an Easter egg, but important nonetheless. Meanwhile, we get Sparky, Vision's synthezoid dog, showing up pre-synth. Oh, remember how Billy and Tommy eventually grow up, kinda, to become Wiccan and Speed? Well, they even wear their superhero colors in this episode. Look at those sharp-dressed boys. We also get this line.
I know an aerospace engineer who'd be up for this challenge.
You know who's an aerospace engineer in the comics? Reed Richards, baby! Woo! Fantastic Four, yeah! The episode's Lagos commercial is a reference to the instigating event in Captain America Civil War, wherein Wanda fails to stop Crossbone's suicide bombing in, well, Lagos. She wound up blamed for the tragic results, resulting in turn in the Sokovia Accords. More trauma as TV commercials. Vision is shown to be able to awaken people with a touch, a power shared by a girl named Layla Miller in House of M.
This will be your only warning.
Now near the end, we get the return of Wanda's Sokovian accent, since it seemed to disappear in Infinity War. Looks like her issues with control have been long in the making, and they're starting to break down. We get what appear to be the Growing Pains credits at the end as Wanda tries to turn attention away from the conversation with Vision, which is probably the most too many cooks this show has gotten thus far. Of course, this brings us right back around to that wild Quicksilver cameo at the end, which, I mean, holy cow, this almost definitely means the multiverse is very much real and very much getting crossed. There's no reason for Wanda to know about Evan Peters' version of the character, so it would appear that she's brought the Quicksilver from a separate reality, opening the door for all sorts of old characters turned anew. This is history, people. And even though I set out to cover every Easter egg thus far, fact is this show is so chock full that I definitely skipped over a few, from sitcom callbacks to comic book tidbits and little visual motifs, and just yikes, it's exhausting. Yell at me in the comments and tell me what I missed and why I should feel ashamed for that.